just go to the video. You see that there's a mic, and next to the mic there's a camera.
Okay, so the video.
Yeah, on the top bottom left.
Okay, so now it says choose avatar, choose video filter, choose virtual background, blur my background.
Yeah, you know what you can do, ne? Mr. Denver, you there, ne? What is Mr. Denver? Just look on the bottom left. Ne?
Can I come in quickly, Ms. Shirley?
Yes, Denver.
Ms. Orlando, maybe what happens to me as well, sometimes on the laptop itself, where the camera is, there's a switch that you can move open and close. It might be that one is closed.
It is open, so now it's closed.
Okay, so it shows black. And if you open it?
And now it's open.
Is that no, nothing's changing? So it should be by your video settings. Try to choose one of the options that says blur background or anything like that.
Blur background.
Mm-hmm. Because here on my side, Mr. Denver and Dr. Orlandine, I can stop your video, but then if I click on this, it will stop. I'm not sure if I'd stop and activate again. Yes, there you are. We can see it.
Yes, but now it's like a terrible background.
Now you can blur the background.
Because normally is that better? Yeah, because normally I've got the Parliament picture on my iPad.
Yes.
Okay, will this be fine for today?
That would be great. Yeah, it's fine. And then you'll be flighting the presentation. Should I make you a co-host?
No, I think Siraj will be flighting. Siraj Mohammed.
Siraj.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. Otherwise, are you good?
I'm good. So I was so nervous. I actually came into the office because twice before I was locked out from the presentation at home. So I thought, no, let me rather do it from the office.
Nelia, it nearly happened to me yesterday. The reception is bad I'm in Durbanville. I had a problem in Durbanville yesterday.
Me too. I'm also in that area.
I had to drive to town so that I could get the reception.
Yeah, that's what's happening to me now. So I came in because in Durbanville it was terrible.
Okay, I'm happy.
Okay, then I'll see you just now. Thank you.
You're most welcome.
Thank you.
Khaitsedi Kagiso dumela.
Abuto ka dumela ho jwang?
Ke teng o kae?
Ke teng ke tsebela ho bona.
Ke a leboha ke a bona o ntse o dira kokota ke ra no you welcome.
I know ke a leboha ne ke batla hore ke check hore system ya bereka because ile ya mpha mathata.
Yo these days in Zikibwa Nelia it gives us a lot of problem. I had to move yesterday and then I left earlier so that I could attend to some of the things sayona this thing
no. Hi Eriki tahle ke shebe di notes quickly.
Sure. Yeah. Honorable Kaleka Mazibuko, good morning and welcome.
Honorable Mashile. Good morning. Good morning.
You're not lost. In fact, it should be a borrowed robe, and I would welcome that one. How are you?
You have become part of us. You have become part of us. Sometimes we forget. We think you are also honorable.
I know. It also happens to some of the members. They normally do that. They say, "Hey, it's a slip of the tongue." Yeah, you're welcome.
Right. How are you this morning, guys?
Good.
It's people say good December, boss.
December. Definitely. There's no other December except for this one.
The year is finished. The year is done.
The year is done indeed. We are preparing for next year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, okay. All right, guys. Thanks. Have a good day.
Same to you, know.
Good morning, honorable members, and good morning to all our team that is here. I must apologize, I'm in Parliament in a construction site because they're working out here. So let me just double check with honorable members if you can hear me. Honorable Bateman, I see you on the platform.
All good, Chair. Honourable Chair, good morning to you.
Good morning.
And to my colleagues.
Well, I'm glad we're able to hear one another. I'd like to resume the meeting. It is
recording in progress.
Can I ask the Secretariat if you could flight the agenda for today?
Yes, it's coming, Chair.
Yeah, Mashila, are we able to project that agenda?
Yes, it's coming.
Thank you very much. Honorable members, if you have a look at the agenda for today, effectively what we are going to do is have two sets of presentations, and this is if you like, a double header of a meeting. We will be looking at the presentation by the Parliamentary Budget Office. We will have deliberations on that presentation. We will then proceed to presentation by National Treasury. And the reason for putting National Treasury second, partly because we want to be able to have enough time with National Treasury on both sides. We will split the meeting between 9 o'clock till 10:30 with the PBO, then 10:30 till midday with the National Treasury. We'll work it out like that. This is not to suggest that we may start earlier or later on the basis of both. We will then have deliberations on that score and then proceed with announcements. So it's a fairly straightforward agenda. There's a number of things that we've got to discuss, given that we are under pressure to try and achieve the processing and also the consultation processes of both the bills that are before us. And today's meeting is exclusively set up with those in mind. May I ask if there's a member who's willing to move for the adoption of the agenda today? Thank you, Honorable Bateman. I see your hand is up. May I recognize you?
Yes, Chair. I'm moving for the adoption of the agenda.
Is there a member who would like to second the adoption of the agenda? I see Honorable Mkonto. May I recognize you?
Thanks, Chair. Good morning. I second the move, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that in mind, with the agenda duly adopted, let me officially open the meeting and welcome both the Parliamentary Budget Office, but also the National Treasury that is here with us here today. I want to welcome honorable members who are here. I recognize that equally so, we've also got the parliamentary professional staff who are here. And so we should have a very fruitful and an important engagement today. Let me, before we proceed, check if there are any apologies for today. The ones we have received up to this point, I've received an apology which is standard from Deputy Minister of Finance, Honorable Saropin, as a cabinet, as a cabinet meeting. There's also an apology from Honorable Lekhanyane, who is in some correctional facility today, if I'm not mistaken. No, it's at the ad hoc committee today. So, and then Honorable Gamede is also engaged in the Human Settlements Committee, and those are all the apologies I have for today. Are there any other apologies that I need to recognize?
Yes, Chair, we do have. I'm not really sure if you touched on this. The Deputy the Minister of Finance, Honorable Sarupen, will not be able to attend because of the cabinet meetings today.
I had covered that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Are there any other apologies for today?
No, that's Honorable Gwangwa. Did you do Honorable Gwangwa? Yes.
No. Okay. With that in mind, then, those are all the apologies we've got for today. Honorable members, it is now 9:05. We have a very full agenda, so I'm going to ask the Parliamentary Budget Office. I assume the director is on the platform, Professor Jantjies, and will be leading the team and taking us through the presentation. Honorable the Professor, just so you know, I mean, obviously, the presentation was circulated to members. Members should have it. Please let us try and avoid a situation where we have a re-chop. Let's keep to the time allocated. You will have until 9:35, which is half an hour for the presentation, and then members will then have an hour of deliberations. Some of the items can be used naturally in responding to the questions, so you don't need to feel the need to read them into the record. The presentation is done. Welcome, Professor Jantjies, and I wish you well with the team. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the presentation. Your time will begin now.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, members. Good morning, colleagues from Treasury. Good morning, colleagues from Parliament. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Quite tight time there, Chairpersons, but we'll try our best. But I've already asked the colleagues that let's try to avoid exactly that. So I've already asked the colleagues to do that as well. Look, our presentation, I've got the team on the platform. I'll do the intro as usual and then do the latter part of it. But just to next slide, just to clarify, just go to the content. Who's moving the slides? Who's moving the slides for us? Yes, I think we do try to emphasize, an update on the context from which the budget is presented. And I think it's a approach that we've followed over the years. And I feel it's very relevant that this committee think about what the budget is meant for and whether the budget is really indeed going where it's supposed to be doing, but also trying to reflect some of the outcomes. So we love doing that, and we feel it's a value add from our perspective. And also, lastly, look at some of we added an addendum on the Border Management Authority in line with the consensus with the chairpersons, where when time comes out from the work that you've asked us to do, just to in line with the debate on the revised budget as well, you can take that into account as well. Next slide. So when time allows, we can look at those 3 slides on the Border Management Authority funding analysis as well. Next slide. I don't think the slides are being reflected properly, but let me stop there instead of time and give I think it's Kagiso to take us through the first part of the presentation. Kagiso, you want to take us through? Which is from the next slide. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Jantjies. Good morning, honorable members and colleagues from the different stakeholders on the platform. I will be taking you through the situational analysis. And before I do so, it's important to mention that it would be remiss to evaluate the adequacy of the DORA as well as the Special Appropriations Bill without understanding some of the needs that the bills are meant to address. Can you please go to slide 6? Members, while one of the rationale put forward for lowering the inflation target is to align with our trading partners and emerging market peers, it's important that we contextualize this comparison. We want to highlight that we cannot
Sorry, Chairperson, through you. I think whoever's flagging, can you zoom out a bit because it's not clear. We can't see the entire slide. Just zoom in quite a bit because it's very.
Can I make a technical suggestion, which is, if you want to do that, if you go edit, view full screen or enter full screen.
Or slideshow. There's also slideshow there. I'm not sure.
Is this a slideshow or is this a PDF?
It's not a slideshow. You can just go up to the slideshow. On top, on the icons there, on top, slideshow. Top slideshow on top, next to animation. On top, yeah, slideshow. Do a slideshow, yep. From the current slide. Just click from the current slide. Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, this is much better. Okay, continue, Professor. Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you. May I just ask if you can just go back to the previous slide for me? Thank you. Just the next slide, please. Apologies. Thank you. Members, while one of the rationale put forward for lowering the inflation target is to align with our trading partners and emerging market peers, it's important that we contextualize this comparison. We want to highlight that we cannot compare our fiscal and monetary policy targets to those of other countries without considering our overwhelming structural realities. Regrettably, we are a global statistical outlier in terms of our obscene inequality and the highest unemployment rate in the world. The IMF has cautioned that these structural realities undermine growth and social stability, and reducing the inflation target can involve near-term output costs, because it requires tighter monetary policy stance. Next slide, please. Members, the majority of South African households are living through a cost of living crisis. What's important is not just the average inflation, but we need to ask ourselves within that basket, what is becoming more expensive? This graph shows that since 2008, the steepest cumulative price increases have been on essential items such as electricity, water, food, and transport. Equally important is looking at the drivers of these specific increases. A portion are driven by administered prices, which are set by government agencies or regulators. These prices, together with supply-side shocks and price stickiness at retail level, contribute to the CPI deviating from the inflation target. So the gist of what we're raising in the slide is that the appropriateness of using inflation targeting to address these structural issues does warrant further interrogation. Next slide, please. Members, against this backdrop, the role of social protection becomes even more important. This slide shows that as of 2024, just over 2/3 of children were living below the upper poverty line, which is an increase from over half of the children in 2019. We've highlighted the worsening statistic of households that have experienced moderate to severe food insecurity, but what we haven't mentioned is that the Department of Social Development's own assessment shows that over 93% of surveyed SRD recipients use the grant mainly for food. Therefore, we do welcome the extension of the SRD grant to March 2027. At the same time, we have to remind you, members, that about the challenges that my colleague touched on around the loss in the SRD purchasing power, as well as echo the concerns around budget ceilings, as well as the administrative challenges for beneficiaries, which means that many people who are identified as living in the food poverty still cannot access the grant, which is deeply concerning in a country where our expanded unemployment rate is 42.4%. Next slide, please. Members, when it comes to policing, overall, the picture is still quite concerning, as the targets to reduce the murders as well as contact crime against women, children have been missed or failed. In the vote that's in the budget document, National Treasury does link some of the missed targets to the attrition of experienced staff, which has increased workload. This confirms that the reduction of police posts since 2012 has severely constrained capacity. It's important to note that the data in the table only reflects Q1 performance, so the status could improve by the end of Q4, but one does need to probe if some of the targets have been set too low to ensure success by the end of Q4. Furthermore, which is not on the slide, members, it's important to note that the President has declared GBVF as a national crisis, which means that policing priorities may need to reflect this declaration in future. Next slide, please. Members, in terms of higher education, vote 17, the National Treasury budgeted for about 426,000 university students to receive NAFSA support in this financial year, but by mid-year, the number of eligible students had increased to over 566,000, so that's more than 140,000 above what was originally budgeted. According to the NAFSA's representative, this has created a funding shortfall of nearly 14 billion rand, and they note that the increase in eligible students is partly driven by the cost of living crisis, which has expanded eligibility. And it's also in this context where NAFSA has already, NAFSA is already carrying more than 40 billion in outstanding student loans. So our concern is essentially the sustainability of student funding going into budget 2026 and raising demand for funding in the context of high poverty as well as youth unemployment. Next slide, please. Turning to provinces, members, we reiterate that the pursuit of a primary budget surplus must be balanced with our developmental priorities, such as widening access to education. In terms of basic education, if we look at the bright green bar, it shows that the number of public school has been declining over the past decade. And then on the same graph, the darker green shows that the number of independent schools has been rising. And on the right, the orange line shows that the number of learners in public schools has been increasing over the same period. So we're having more learners essentially going into fewer public schools, and this combination inevitably leads to overcrowded classrooms and pressures on infrastructure and resources in the remaining schools. So the Department of Education, members, has built new and replacement schools over the period, but this is less than half of the public schools that have been lost, and as a result, many parents are effectively left with a choice between sending their children to overcrowded and under-resourced public schools or sacrificing essentials to pay for independent school fees. Next slide, please. Members, this slide shows that as of February of this year, there were over 31,000 vacant educator posts, and that then more than half of these vacant are teacher vacancies. This directly affects class sizes and the quality of teaching and the administrative workload on the remaining teachers. We provide this context so that when you consider the provincial equitable share as well as the education grant, a key question to ask is whether there is room, or rather whether room has been provided in the budget to fill these critical posts. Next slide, please. Members, this slide shows the challenges facing our public schools when it comes to infrastructure. On average, about 2/3 of public schools have no labs and almost half have no libraries, despite the norms and standards set more than a decade ago requiring these facilities. Some provinces are in a better position than others, but the overall picture is that many learners still don't have access to basic learning resources like libraries and labs. Next slide, please. Members, the health sector faces similar structural pressure in terms of large number of vacant posts. And the key takeaway from this slide is that while resolving the legacy challenges remains a priority, it is also critical that these vacancies, including key management and support posts, are filled so that irregularities as well as weak financial controls do not arise from the gaps in governance. And also so that workers and patients are protected from current long queues caused by staff shortages. Next slide, please. And on the last slide, members, or on the situational analysis, it brings us to the question again of inflation targeting and the cost of living, but now in the healthcare sector. The dotted blue line is the headline CPI, the red line is medical insurance contributions, and the gray line is the cost of health services. Over time, you see that medical insurance is almost always sits above the overall inflation. So the point we're making is that for the more than 9.8 million South Africans who rely on medical schemes, lowering the overall inflation target does not guarantee that their premiums will go down. In other words, in terms of the private healthcare, the current approach to inflation targeting may not resolve the cost pressures that households face, given the structure of the private healthcare sector, as well as the way in which the sector is regulated or lack of. I'll hand over to the next colleague. Thank you.
Thank you, Kagiso. Good morning, honourable members. Next slide, please. In terms of the division of revenue framework, although it has changed from the budget, provisional allocations not appropriated of 1.8 billion remains available for early retirement cost still in the current financial year. In terms of, also to note, the contingency reserve increased by 13.5 billion or to 13.5 billion. So this is for infrastructure projects funded through the budget facility, North and Iron or core corridors, rebuilding of sections of the Parliamentary complex, and the capitalization of the credit guarantee vehicle. In 2026, for the local elections and Centex dual illumination costs. These funds will be allocated to relevant departments later in the financial year. So we can expect special appropriations bills again. In terms of the adjustments to the division of revenue framework, the changes since the budget, you can see in terms of allocations to the national sphere, it was 49.2%. It's now 48.4%. In terms of provinces, it went up to 41.6%, and the allocation to local government, the proportion is now 9.6%. Next slide, please. In terms of the provincial equitable shares, that increased by 14.42 billion, which is mainly allocated for education and health for covering compensation of employees. 4.6 billion is to accommodate population changes that affect provincial equitable shares. And then previous increases over the MTEF was 4.8%, but it's now been reduced to 3.1% over the medium term. Next slide, please. In terms of the in-year adjustments to conditional grants, provincial allocations include an additional 644 million for reconstruction and rehabilitation of provincial infrastructure damaged by flooding in the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal, which is mainly allocated to education, health, and for provincial roads. The local government allocations also include 496 million for the Municipal Disaster Recovery Grant. Allocations to reforms of the Metro Trading Services component of the Urban Development Finance Grant, and another change is approved rollover in the Public Transport Network Grant specifically for eThekwini. Next slide. Members, just in terms of, we've been speaking about the reforms in conditional grants, but some of the reforms on the right-hand side that was already announced in the 2026 budget has not materialized, and it still remains over the 26-27 financial year, or even over the, will only start from the 2027 MTEF period, such as the school infrastructure backlog grant that will be merged into the education infrastructure grant. Next slide, please. In terms of local government reforms and service delivery, the white paper is still being reviewed on local government, and it aims to create a modern, professional and accountable local government system in South Africa by addressing systematic shortcomings. But I think Solga has covered a lot of this already yesterday. Next slide, please. Next slide. In terms of the main adjustments in the 2025-26 adjusted budget, the debt service cost was decreased by 4.8 billion, declared unspent funds 8.7, which is much more than it was last year. Rollovers is 5.23 billion. Expenditure of an exceptional nature is 2.5 billion. And we've mentioned this, that this is a new category allowing urgent spending under Section 6 of the Appropriations Act. We've mentioned the equitable share that increased, the contingency reserve, and then there was a special appropriations of 754.5 million, but we will discuss that. The Department of Justice and Constitutional Development is allocated a further 192.9 million. And then there was an additional amount of 131.3 million to cover costs related to the South African hosting of the G20 summit. Next slide. So some of the adjustments, appropriations per economic classification and category. The table excludes the 1.6 billion for unforeseen and unavoidable, and the 2.5 billion for expenditure of an exceptional nature. But what is important is the compensation of employees in the national departments are adjusted downwards by 1.5 billion. And members, this continuous practice might require intervention in future budgets. Goods and services increased by 6.4 billion. And within the 6.4 billion, we will find a lot of compensation of employees' funds that was shifted to goods and services. Next slide. Members, I won't go through all the detail of these slides because I saw that the Treasury is going to cover this as well. But just to define rollovers, it is supposed to be unspent funds from the previous financial year for activities that have not been completed but are close to completion. The detail of last year's items is actually not available to really assess these rollovers. But I'm not convinced that all of these adhere to the criteria for rollover, specifically in corporate governance and public works and infrastructure, as well as the payments that are now, that relates to the G20 meetings. The biggest rollovers are in social development and communication and digital technology. Next slide. Just to give you an example, in terms of communication and digital technology, payments are towards goods and services for services rendered by broadband in FRACO, Centec, and the State Information Technology Agency for phase 1 and 2 of the South African Connect rollout. Another example that I also thought might not have adhered to the rules is in forestry and fisheries, 6.3 million towards a transfer and subsidies for the South African National Biodiversity Institution from a rollover. Another example, what I actually thought was interesting, is 137,000 in transport, that is rollover for furniture, computers, and office equipment. Next slide. Members, in terms of the virements and shifts, just a few also interesting virements and shifts. In communication and digital technology, they shift funds from travel and subsistence to acts of grace. This is the first time that I see an item such as acts of grace. I have no idea what it is. Departments of Trade and Industry and Competition, from compensation of employees or vacant positions to venues and facilities. They also shifted funds from the IDC, 150 million, to departmental agencies and goods and services. Small business, classified product markets program to goods and services, and they also reclassified the asset assist program to goods and services. In forestry and fisheries, 13.9% was shift from environmental programs to forestry management and fisheries. This is not the only department that shifted more than 8%, but the Treasury will also provide you the detail of all the other departments that shifted more than 8%. In terms of employment and labor, compensation of employees, they've got a lot of vacant positions. They shifted that money to goods and services for debt write-offs and CCTV cameras. In police, my colleague also mentioned they shift compensation of employees of 932 million to goods and services. And again, the shift of 1 million donation to the Police Service Education Trust. Members, the adjustments budget indicate they shift this money to non-profit institution, but it is actually a trust fund, and I tried to get hold of this fund, but I couldn't. There is actually no information in terms of the size of this fund. In terms of justice and constitutional development, they shift compensation of employees of 405 million to goods and services, machinery and equipment, and buildings and other fixed structures. Members, the continuous shifting of compensation of funds needs intervention by oversight bodies. Next slide. Just in terms of the function groups, the biggest amendment in 2025 is to the Economic Development Budget Function Group and is due to the declared unspent funds in transport and for water and sanitation. Next slide. In terms of some of the adjustments to departments, you can see last year Defence overspent, but the budget didn't increase to cover that previous year's overspending. And then at this stage, that budget has been adjusted, actually, also in terms of what they might need for to spend by the end of the year. But this is also a continuous practice in terms of defence, and we do not know what the reasons are for this. The biggest adjustment is Home Affairs, National Treasury and Basic Education, and budgets for transport and water and sanitation are also reduced. Not on this slide, but just to mention that there is slow spending in the first six months of 2025, In agriculture, they only spent 31.9%. Forestry and fisheries is currently on 37.3%. High expenditure in the first 6 months of 2025 are recorded for employment and labour, and that is at 61%. Members, some of the interesting midterm performance and progress that is also indicated in the adjustments budget. What is interesting is that in terms of public service and administration, they indicated that they referred investigations to 19 departments in terms of to public administration, ethics, integrity and disciplinary technical assistance units. There was delays in the revision of the disciplinary code, and that is due to a recommendation by the Public Service Coordinating Bargaining Council to review the mandate for the disciplinary code. A submission was made to the Minister on 9 April, requesting an update mandate that includes changes related to precautionary suspensions. In terms of defence, they've done 2,400 hours of flown against a target of 12,000 for the year, and they recorded 2,377 hours at sea against a target of 8,000 for the year. In agriculture, 10,536 subsistence and smallholder producers able to achieve that. 32 producers were supported through blended funding schemes against a target of 100 for the year. In terms of science and technology and innovation, just to point out, they've underspent in 2024-25. The target for several bursaries and research grants were reduced in the adjusted budget to align to available budget. Members, the analysis of this budget has been presented to the committee, and a review of the structure of the budget should be considered for efficiency. Thank you very much. Next presenter.
Good morning, honourable members. I don't think the next slide, please. Okay, next slide, please. We've already presented this to honourable members. As you may recall, in the pre-budget workshop, as members know, 754.5 million has been appropriated in terms of the special appropriation bill towards health to deal with the fallout in funding for the PEPFAR funding. We've already covered this. As members will recall, this is mostly in conditional grants. Next slide, please. Here in the subsequent presentation by National Treasury, they've shown us the details of how much is going to each province. And as members will see that KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng and the Eastern Cape get approximately 16% of the 590 million, which is allocated through the provincial allocations. You'll note there that the Northern Cape has no allocation. Next slide, please. I'll take the slide as read, but just to really highlight that there are already implications for the PEPFAR fallout, which means that there are already rising infections that will need to be dealt with in the long run. But also here, what we were highlighting in the slide was the question about whether allocations have been made to NGOs that have been impacted by the funding cuts. So the question is, to what extent does this 754 million address the true fallout of the PEPFAR funding, but also to highlight that in terms of global health funding, we're seeing reductions in the long run, which means that we need to take seriously allocations on a domestic front to ensure that our healthcare system is able to take or be able to be resilient when such funding trends change in the greater scheme of things. Next slide, please. I'll hand over to the next colleague.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Good morning, honorable chair and members. On this slide, we just pretty much just give an update on expenditure to date using Section 30 report, just to show that they did show that current expenditure for all votes stood at 49.6%, which is slightly lower than the previous financial year. Next slide, please. On this next slide, we show spending by economic classification. Once again, you can see that transfers and subsidies take the bulk of expenditure. That's where most of the money is. And then the second biggest item is current payments, which involves payment for capital, payment for goods and services, as well as compensation of employees. However, payments for capital assets, it's low at 42.7%, only 7.3 billion worth of infrastructure or capital related issues has been spent, again showing issues with the challenges around infrastructure projects, readiness, planning, and execution. Next slide, please. On this next slide, we just show overall provincial expenditure at the end of Q2. For 399.2 billion has been expended, which is around 49.9%. The same structure, outlines most of that money is capital spending. Most of that is transfers, but capital spending is still one of the slowest performing items, even at the provincial level. 18.9 billion has been expended out of a budget of 43.8 billion. Next slide, please. On this slide, we just provide an overview of local government outcomes for the financial year 2024-2025, which ran from June to July, from June 2024 to July 2025. You can see that there are a number of issues affecting municipalities. 49 out of 257 have got cash flow problems, but overall underspending using preliminary figures stands at 86.5 billion. So that just shows as well, most conditional grant expenditure as well is also low, only at 66.1%. So it shows that generally the country or the government in general, they've got issues with regards to produce infrastructure. So when they say they're going to spend around $1 trillion in the next MTF, then there's a need to put more resources to ensure that indeed that money results in actual infrastructure on the ground. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. I will hand over to the director.
No, thank you so much, colleagues. Chairperson and members, we did run through. I think the key message here is that we do try to highlight that the current spending, the operational spending, lacks more details that allows proper oversight around environment. So we think that has been taken into account in the discussions and thinking. We do see that there's additional allocation given in the division of revenue to the two spheres, which are very important, but in the medium term, we also do see a lot of reforms in either being the provincial or local government, but also within the conditional grants. So it's important to take these into account, particularly if they improve the outcomes of spending in these areas in particular, especially when you look at the issue of governance faced by many municipalities in this regard. We also do look at, highlight the issue of special appropriations. This remains similar to how we reported it previously, but I think the key questions remains those around how extensive is this allocation, particularly looking at the other outside budget players who have been supporting the program itself, how that allocation over the long term take that into consideration as well. Next slide. Looking at the midterm spending, we do see, as we reported in the previous one, we do see, as we reported previously, that indeed the spending is on track on the spheres, but I think the key issue remains at the heart of this economic development and economic growth is around capital spending and some delays in infrastructure itself. And even in the outcomes of the local government, unaudited finances do show these pressures as well, delayed spending. As I said, we encourage Parliament to take quite close attention to reforms in the local government sectors. But I think we have emphasized importance around the better coordination between the macroeconomic policy or fiscal policy and monetary policy. We're not convinced at the stage that's been taken into account. And also, lastly, the issue around while resolving legacy issues, it's important to recognize the critical need of some of the supposed to deliver services in the process of reforms and or dealing with legacy issues. Just a quick 3 minutes, Chair. I ask beg of you to just give an overview of the addendum. Go to the next few slides. Next slide. Around the Border Management Authority. I think next slide. I think this analysis was just in response to the committee's request, particularly around the discussions around the Border Management Authority engagement that the committee has had over the past few months, and you've requested to look at this matter. And we had divided into two folds. There's a phase 1 and phase 2. And I think phase 1 just look at immediate need, and phase 2 look at a more long-term issue around funding of the authority, but also implementation of the Act itself. So we looked at the legislation itself, looked at the budget trends, but also a previous slide, not done, but also looked at the discussions. I had a very extensive discussion with the commissioner, Dr. Masaya Pata, but also look at some of the reports that comes out. I think what's important, we did zoom in quite a lot on the implementation protocols, which were sort of the vehicles from which the Act was going to be implemented, and was these engagements or agreement with the A authority and different departments and entities in particular. That's how we'll get. Next slide. Some of the key findings, of course, the committee will have time to look at this in more detail. We divided them into the structural issues. There's also operational issues which we picked up. The first two items here really deals with structural issues. One of the key issues that comes out very clearly is that you see that even the Act was very clearly spelling out how the authority has to be implemented. There has been sort of twofold implementation of this. You find that there's one area where there was consensus of amalgamating, where some of the departments recognized and understood the need to amalgamate into the Act to form a one agency where it take all the functions. But also equally, there was other component that came in, which is not in the Act, which was around the some of the entities or departments opting for coordination protocols rather than amalgamating. That, for me, that's where it effectively ring-fencing the budgets of those and personnel of those entities like SAPS, SNDF and SARS and so on. Whereas you have those two implementation modes, which, in my view, this were some of the key issues of funding and all that came in there. The second point related to the budget as well. One of the key points from your request, Chair and members, was around the issue of the South African police services, which are meant to be allocated or at least amalgamated within the new authority. And we do see that because of this coordination protocol, one or the other, there wasn't going to be possible to integrate this, because according to the protocol, they were not meant to amalgamate, but to coordinate, whereby they to still remain within the area where they were originally. The third component, dealing with operational, it's really the issue of you do see that one of the issues that came up, you realize there were functions, departments that gave up the functions to the authority, but there's contestation around, even if they gave personnel, how much of the operational budget related to those departments was entirely allocated to the border management authority. And that's a key issue which, in our view, might have also led to the challenges in funding in this regard. The last point, next slide, which is operational as well, relates to, next slide, relates to unfunding, particularly where even if these amalgamation happened from different departments, focus was a lot on personnel and less so on section and operation costs, which in a way impacted the authority, at least in a earlier sense, to have much needed operational budget to get source of trade and so on and so forth. And certainly there was a lot of reliance on the police or the police members there was a heavy reliance at the beginning of having to absorb those, and that has impacted also the effort in particular. In a sense, it plays a bigger role in terms of seeing how the thing it gets unfold over the next times or so. Some of the 3 points we also do recommend, or at least members to take into account the discussions, is really because at the heart of this, the Portfolio Committee of Policy might have to be involved in this conversation, particularly as the discussion around whether those police were supposed to go there or were they supposed to be there or why they're not there and so on. That will enrich the conversation to involve them, particularly resolving the impasse, which we see, as I say, in my view, as a result of interpretation of the implementation control setup. We do think there's a need for committee to request National Treasury to do a substantive analysis of conversation about this thinking conversations or this converging views around what's happening, and provide committee with more substantive analysis, hence given that they are at the center of coordination of some of these matters. But also, I mean, one point that is very provocative, last point there, is really to say, if this committee wants to, may as well recommend that the 2.6 billion was allocated to National Treasury to the subs, later 4,000 might have to be recommended to be allocated. But remember, why I'm saying it's controversial mainly because the implementation implementation control did not support the amalgamating this workforce within the authority, even if the Act itself does provide for that. Chair, members, thank you so much. We'll pause here and take in reflection from the committee. Thank you so much. There are additional slides which members can go through them in right time. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Chair and members. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Thanks.
Thank you, Prof, and thank you to the team. If you don't mind, I want to just check procedurally with members. When we agreed on the agenda, we also agreed that we would have deliberations that deal just with the PBO presentation, and then we'd go with National Treasury afterwards. Having reflected on the slides that the PBO have put together, certainly on some of the adjustments, there does seem to be similar information across both the presentation that the National Treasury on some of the adjustments are. There were two presentations that spoke to that. So I wanted to find out procedurally if members would be okay if we took the presentation from National Treasury, the presentations, and then spent the bulk of the time, then that remains, doing deliberations, and we could ask in a similar manner that each party is allocated more specific questions that deal with both presentations to whatever, and we'd extend the time that parties have to ask questions. Could that be procedurally acceptable by members? Of course, I'm assuming that National Treasury is on the platform. Honorable Kalega Mazabugo, let me recognize you.
Chair, I do agree with your view, because I was also thinking, as the Prof and the team were presenting some of my questions here, I think the relevant department to respond to them is Treasury. So I think to avoid asking questions that might be responded by Treasury, let's have these presentations so that we can address all of them, including Prof's suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honorable Waitlin, I see your hand. Will you support that view?
Good morning, Chair. Yes, no, it's fine. Please continue that we can take it together because there's some correlation between the two submissions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. With that intervention agreed to, Professor Pakis, I think is here, and then I see you are here. You were one of the presenters, and then I know the Deputy Director General is also one of the presenters. Is it possible to be able to present, Doc? And I think it's Ulrika, if I'm not mistaken.
Chair, good morning, and good morning to the honourable members. Yes, we could present to you. We are ready. I am assuming that you want to take it in the order as per the agenda, to start with the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill, then we go into the Adjusted Appropriation Bill, and then we go into the Special Appropriation Bill.
Please, if we could do it in that manner, and then if we take the presentations, and then if you wouldn't mind, the deliberations, will lump them together collectively, if that is agreeable to you. Is that okay?
That's fine, Chair. So we will start with Dr. Pakis on the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill, and then I'll come in, and then Dr. Bicha will come in after me.
Great. Thank you very much.
Could I just request that we get sharing rights so that we are able to flag from our side? Thanks.
Good morning, Chairperson and the honorable members. I think on my side, I'm ready to start. So this presentation, honorable members, will touch on the overview of the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill. I'm going to take you through how perhaps, to assist the members to look at the bill and where to find the relevant information that they might be interested in. And then later on, I'm going to speak to some of the reforms that will be implemented as part of the 2026 Division of Revenue as presented by the Minister, but also the updates in terms of the deliberations that are currently taking place in that space as well. So, honorable members, this, in essence, is how the amendment bill process allows for. So obviously, when we met with yourselves in June, having the minister having tabled the main budget at the time, you considered the division of revenue bill at the time, which was then later made an act, and then through that process as well, we then had to gazette the 212 pages of that bill to then effectively make the other parts of the bill a law as well. And then subsequent to that, we then embarked on a process to then make amendments to that bill. So everything else that is going to come in the first part of the presentation will really be reflecting on the changes that are being proposed to that act which you had considered. And more specifically, honorable members, we're just driven by section 32 of the PFMA, which then contains what should be really considered as part of the amendment bill. And then obviously it is matters related to unforeseeable economic and financial events, unforeseen and unavoidable expenditures, but also any expenditure in terms of section 16. I think the PBO has already mentioned the PEPFAR response that was provided in terms of that, but also the monies appropriated for expenditure that the minister would have announced at the time of the main budget. So we've got a few slides that are starting to speak to that utilization of savings, and then of course some unspent funds. There are, honorable members, changes that have been made in terms of the bill clauses, specifically related to clause 2 of the bill, which amends section 16 in terms of the Principal Act. So this is something that is quite, I know the committee is quite passionate about around the library services and the unfunded mandate. So there is work that Western Cape government is doing in this space, and we're just changing the rules of the game to ensure that we clarify some of the matters. For instance, the new clause now would require that the relevant provincial treasury and municipality agree on a payment schedule. This is to ensure that we close the loop on the issue of unfunded mandates, and that has to then be submitted to National Treasury through the provincial treasury as the custodian of the funds, and then that the gazetting of those allocations to be transferred to municipalities done in a transparent manner so that we can also follow up on that process. Honorable members, when we met with yourselves late in June, we had presented column A of the first table there, which is Schedule 1. So Schedule 1 is specifically looking at the share of the three spheres of government in terms of the equitable share. But what we're coming to you with now is that there are amendments. Yes, Chair.
I just want to intervene so that you don't get surprised at the end of this. I'd forgotten to indicate the time allocations because you've got 3 sets of presentations. So what I wanted to suggest is that, especially on the key ones, you spend between 15 to 20 minutes on each, because you started, National Treasury began at about 1:45, and I want to allow members' deliberation closer to just after 10:30. So just keep that in mind in your deliberation stock so that we don't, the presentations are sent specifically so that members go through them in advance. So if I can ask that just to the DDG to keep that conscious so that when the team presents, it understands the time that we're trying to work towards. Otherwise, A, we won't finish, B, we won't be able to spend enough time with deliberations. But ultimately, National Treasury and PBO will have time to respond to the respective questions of clarity on the go. So I just wanted to clarify that point, Prof, before you are surprised when I have to intervene later.
Okay, no, thanks for that, Honorable Chair. I will try to also take that into account as I move through these slides. So I was saying in terms of Schedule 1, we're amending column A, and the adjustments will be seen in the middle column. And then the resultant adjustments would then be on the far right-hand side of the second table here. Honourable members, these are the changes, and I think it helps that the PBO has already spoken to most of these. There were 3 provinces in particular, Free State, Gauteng, as well as the Northwest, that were adversely affected by the changes in terms of the demographic data, which then the minister had announced that where the space allows, he will then be in a position to assist those provinces to deal with that, because it does mean that funds follow the function, and then in that case they would be losing quite substantially. But there are programs on the ground, so there is a phased a portion that needs to be taken into account. So that 4.6 billion is added in this amendment bill. However, it's meant to take care of the kind of impact over the next 3 years. So the provincial treasuries know how to then manage that process to ensure that it lasts for that long. Honorable members, I'm not going to speak to the additions that have been provided for disasters, just to indicate that the disasters that we're speaking to here are those that occurred after the main budget was tabled, meaning they fit into the unforeseen and unavoidable expenditures, especially in the Eastern Cape as well as KwaZulu-Natal. But there are other provisions for other provinces as well, which were affected by different disasters, which we're going to speak to at some point. Again, honorable members, the budget facility for infrastructure is making additional resources in terms of the health facility revive grant to 2 regional hospitals in the Western Cape. One is getting 22 million, the other one is getting 31 million as well. There's a rollover to assist the Limpopo Central Hospital for 14 million, but also there are some replacement to other clinics in Free State as well to the tune of 9 million as well as 10 million as well. Again, there's a prioritization that comes from the school infrastructure backlogs grant, which amounts to 343 million. And this is split into 2 projects that is going to be funding. One is the project that the Department of Basic Education is in charge of in terms of the workbooks. That's where the bulk of that 300 million is going. And then the infrastructure assessments as well. So this is made available by the space that was available within that grant. So there are no projects that are going to be compromised by making those funds available there. Honorable members, there was an incorrect amount that was allocated to the Eastern Cape as well as the Northwest. And then this money was meant for the Western Cape province in terms of the National Tertiary Services Grant. So we're making that correction now here. Again, honorable members, funds were added to the grant. The 2 grants that are managed by the Department of Human Settlements in terms of the Human Settlement Development Grant and the Informal Settlement Partnership Development Grant. So these funds are still going to the KZN province, but they will be channeled through the provincial equitable share. Changes to local government grants. Again, honorable members, we're making funds available to a number of municipalities that were affected by disasters. So 496 million is added in terms of the municipal disaster recovery grant, especially for Eastern Cape. And then there were provisional allocations that were made for the Metro Trading Services reform. So those have been confirmed and they are being put as part of this amendment bill now as confirmation. Again, the rollover to eThekwini has already been spoken to. Honorable members, with all these changes that are happening in terms of the grant allocations, by law, we need to consult with yourselves so that we can then get approval to make the changes to the frameworks. So mainly for disaster-related allocations, we will be amending the frameworks. In the main, we are only earmarking these to ensure that they can only be used for the specific purpose that they've been allocated for. So as you can see in each of the grants, we're making these changes to ensure that there's clarity in terms of how these funds can be used as well. So once this bill has been enacted, obviously all these amended frameworks as shown in the particular annexures of this bill, as well as the allocations to municipalities would then be gazetted as well. There are allocations, honorable members, that have been made outside of the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill that still have an impact in terms of the provinces and municipalities as well. So these have been made available through Section 6 of the Appropriations Act, and then most of those the PBO has spoken to. So these are really the commitments that the minister had indicated in the main budget, but also as they relate to making funding available to provinces in the main education and health to assist with the employment of doctors as well as teachers, but to also deal with issues of approvals in that space as well, and to also then respond to PEPFAR. I think the indication from the PBO around the 590 million for PEPFAR is noted. And what is important is that Northern Cape didn't get the allocation because Northern Cape wasn't receiving these particular funds that the provinces have been compensated for. So they continue to receive other funding from donors which haven't been stopped as well. So there is no shortchanging the province as a result of these additions that are taking place. Again, honorable members, Section 6 is allowed for a number of other disaster-related allocations. These fall outside of the unforeseen and unavoidable. So these are the disasters that would have taken place from April 2024 until March 2025 as well. And there's quite a number of those as well. This table, honorable members, shows the specific allocations around the provincial and municipal allocations as well. And then from here, honorable members, this is just to give you a flavor of where the budget process is in terms of the shares for each of the spheres of government. Of course, we're seeing some improvements for provincial as well as the local, and that's owing to the additions that are being made. So the adjustments that are being made in here, actually, they have carried through course going forward, which will then see the shares of provinces and municipalities increase over the 2026 MTF. These next 3 slides, honorable members, are really just to give you an update in terms of where we are. So we had already spoken to you around some of the measures, especially in the agriculture space. At the time of the budget, when we indicated this, we were saying there is work underway to ensure that we do this in a responsible manner. Now we're coming and say the 2026 budget would actually see the shift of funds as we have reached that point where these have been socialized across the sector with the provincial treasuries as well, aware of the process and managing it from their end as well. This also speaks to the collaboration that we have with agriculture in terms of ensuring that this does not affect farmers on the ground. The measure is taking place, honorable members. As you can see, what we're indicating is that only 450 million of the school backlogs grant would actually be retained, with the bulk of the funding already shifting towards the education infrastructure grant from 26 to 27 and going forward. This is also to ensure that projects are not left unattended during this transition period, that we're able to complete those, but there is no taking of new projects as well. The same is being done in the sport, arts and culture, where the conditional grant for community libraries is being phased into the equitable share. So starting with compensation, so 26-27 will really be where the sector lays a good ground to ensure that they finalize everything that is there, to ensure that when compensation moves into PES, that people are actually not left behind in that process as well. And then later on, we're then going to have to move the infrastructure portion. But we've started ensuring that there are no new libraries that are being built for the fear of doing those in an irresponsible manner as well. In the local government space, we are matching the Integrated National Electrification Program for municipalities, the grant, with the Energy Efficiency Demand Side Management Grant in the 2026 budget. We also, the Minister also announced the phasing out of the Public Transport Network Grant. So discussions now are really exploring what does this mean for the sector and how the sector could be further supported, because public transport remains a key priority for this government as well. There's also a number of conditional grants managed by the Treasury that are coming to an end. The Infrastructure Skills Development Grant, as well as the Neighborhood Development Grant, these are being discontinued. But then, there's still going to be prioritization of these programs within government system, in other grants, but also in other programs as well. There's also the Metro Trading Services component as well, is moving from the Urban Settlement Development Grant to the Urban Development Financing Grant as well, which is where the incentive component of the Metro Trading Services reform currently resides. There are changes that are being discussed to improve the municipal infrastructure grant, especially where there is a clear failure by municipalities to implement, how we can start to use our agencies in MISA as well as the DBSA as a delivery model to ensure that the communities aren't impacted as a result of failures by the municipalities in the main. Honorable Chair, thank you very much. DDG, back to you. Thanks.
Chairperson?
Okay, Chair. Yes, I'm trying to share my screen so that I can present, and I'm hoping that it is now in slideshow. I have to sort that out. Chair, can you please confirm if my screen is visible?
We can see it. It's just that we're seeing your presenter mode. I wonder whether we can put up just a presenter mode, not a presenter mode, but just the slides independent.
Let me try that again. I am hoping that it is now visible.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So, Chair, in the interest of time, I'm going to be brief because a lot of this has been covered already by colleagues. So Dr. Pakis has covered what we can adjust budgets for in terms of the PFMA, and the Money Bills Procedures and Related Matters Act allows us to provides guidance on how this whole process is being sequenced with the Adjustments Appropriation Bill that comes at the end. Chair, then just a summary of the adjustments that we have in the Adjustments Appropriation Bill that is done by economic classification. As previously reflected, a large share of reprioritization or shifts out of compensation of employees, and I will explain some of that details a little bit later, And the other notable thing is that we do have significant savings or declared savings that are being made, most notably in transport and water, and I will also explain that a bit later. So just a summary of the funds that we are appropriating based on expenditure that was announced. So in relation to the National Treasury on the Urban Development Financing Grant, on basic education, and on the provincial equitable share. This was the provisional allocations that was announced. In relation to defense, it was also the provisional allocations that was announced for early retirement. And then the others was part of the Minister of Finance's speech on things that we could not finalize at the time of the budget. This included funding for the National Dialogue, to capacitate Home Affairs and the Office of the Chief Justice, and Stats SA is the other one around all of that. And then just some rescheduling that we are also doing in relation to some BFI projects. On the unforeseeable and unavoidable expenditure, mostly related to disasters, that was already explained. And these were the disasters that happened in this year. So this was disasters that happened after the finalization of the budget. And then we also have an allocation proposed here for the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development for the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry that is currently underway. On rollovers, so rollovers are a bunch of things that includes areas of spending where invoices have been received for expenditures but was not able to be made before the end of the financial year. A large share of that would be capital expenditures, where departments receive invoices for work at the end of the financial year, but that work has not yet been verified, so they do not pay for it. So that's one example of why we have rollovers for CapEx. In the same way that we do for things like in goods and services, where departments have 30 days to pay. So these are invoices that they would have in the system, and they're just not able to pay. So the commitment is made, they just were not able to pay before the end of the financial year. And these are details, the details are provided around all of this. The most notable one is on the social relief of distress and social development. This rollover is really for recipients that were approved, but the verification process around the bank verification and income verification process, that took a little bit longer, so they were not able to make the payments before the end of the financial year. The second largest rollover is in communications and digital technologies, and this is for the implementation of SA Connect, where work as commitments have been made around providing for broadband, fast, high internet speed to low-income households, and also, again, a case of where commitments have been made, but was not able to be paid before the end of the financial year. The others are relatively small compared to those big three, but those are probably the ones I should have focused on. In relation to self-financing expenditure, Chair, this is where departments generate revenue that is deposited into the National Revenue Fund for specific expenditures. The largest of this would be in Home Affairs, where the fees that they collect for the issuing of IDs and passports comes back into the National Revenue Fund, and we appropriate it back to them for the expenditures associated with the issuing of official documents. A similar one in defense relates to reimbursements that they receive from the United Nations, and then also from the sale of equipment that comes back into the Revenue Fund that we appropriate back to them. Let me maybe spend some time on this one, because this is the one that the PBO has also highlighted as a new area of adjustments. So, Chair, this relates to so these are backlog disasters. So these were disasters that happened in 2024-25, but was not provided for either in the adjustments budget or in the main budget last year. And Section 6 of the Appropriation Act provides the Minister of Finance to authorize expenditure or to allocate expenditures for items of an exceptional nature, that we are able to allow for the flow of funds to respond to these backlog disasters. Section 6.4, I think it is, requires that the Minister of Finance, like we have with Section 16, to table an appropriation bill for this, or to include it in the next National Adjustments budget within 120 days, whichever is first, for these funds to flow. So these are backlog disaster projects compared to what we have under the unforeseeable and unavoidable expenditure that was for disasters that occurred after the budget was finalized. We also have a shifting of funds between votes. And I should just kind of maybe link this to what's happening on the declared unspent funds. But where we did have provisions, or we were not able to kind of make funding available for urgent pressures in the other parts of the legislation that that empowers for the adjustments of budget. So this includes funding for the social summit, for the G20, the money to help with Parliament and the construction and the associated infrastructure that's associated with the refurbishments of the dome, and I suppose. And then also the other one was the Campaign Commission. So, Chair, this 583 million rand from the Department of Transport is combined with the 4.4 billion rand that you're seeing on the unspent funds that totals 5 billion rand, and it was a 5 billion rand reduction on the transfer that was made to SANRAL. So SANRAL is currently sitting on large cash balances due to previous underspending, and it wouldn't make sense to transfer more money from the Department of Transport to SANRAL for its non-toll projects when it was already sitting on significant cash surpluses, and that is where that reduction comes from. The reduction on water relates to delays in the construction of Umkomazi project. So the delays really relate to things like there was some associated with finalizing water supply agreements with municipalities, some procurement issues, and some environmental assessment approvals that was delayed. And then we also, every year, we review what's happening on the social development side, and we have lower than projected spending on the grants, just as the beneficiary numbers are lower. Then just a summary of the environments. So environments, so these are shifts within the vote, so that is why the numbers kind of total on either side of the columns. The most notable environments on this slide are in basic ed, that relates to shifts from the indirect grants, and within the indirect grant, Chair, some authority is provided to the Minister of Finance in relation to what he can provide approvals for, and some on specifically and exclusively appropriated, and others sit with Parliament. And we do detail that in the subsequent slides. And the other one is in higher education, where it's environment within compensation of employees from the TVET program to the CET program, the Community Education Training Program. The most notable environments on this slide, Chair, is in police. This relates to largely a shift from compensation of employees to computer services for the maintenance of the existing systems that the police run. The savings on compensation of employees is as a result of trainees who come into the system later in the financial year. So the savings that you have on potential salaries early on in the financial year is what has been used to defray this expenditure on computer services. The one on the Department of Transport is really fixing an incorrect classification from transfers in financial assets to transfers to the non-toll program, and this relates to GFIP, the Gauteng Freeway Improvement Program payments, where there's a component that is ring-fenced for backlog maintenance compared to what then goes to the debt. So in the main budget, we allocated all of the funds to debt, but there was a component there that needed to come to backlog maintenance. Chair, the next slides, I'm going to go through it quite quickly, even just to save time. But these are the things that requires parliamentary approval, and they exist under very specific circumstances. Either the environment shifts are more than 8%. So even though the Minister of Finance has some authority around some of it, Parliament still has the authority around environments for shifts between programs of more than 8%. So most of them relate to that. There are also environments such as the one in basic education that's got to do with specifically and exclusively earmarked funds. Similarly in health, on the health revitalization component within the different parts of the indirect grant. In IPID, this is related to the 8% rule Similarly, in military veterans, the one in communications has got to do with in the Treasury regulations, any sponsorships or donations that is over 100,000 Rand must be approved separate, must be provided for separately in the appropriation bill and must be approved by Parliament. So this is really a donation that is more than 100,000 Rand. My apologies, this is quite small, but this is again one that is where shifts between main divisions of the vote is more than 8%. And similarly in the two shifts in the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. Chair, I put this one in here just because we had published it like this, but we realized that we put the footnote incorrectly. So this does actually require Treasury approval, which has been received, and notifying you that we made a mistake in the book, but this is really one that doesn't necessarily need parliamentary approval. Chair, this is my last slide before I hand over to Dr. Beecher. And this is related to environments in the rural development program in the Department of Land Reform and Rural Development. Chair, this is quite a large environment shift where over a third of the budget is being shifted, mostly from planning, infrastructure planning services to pay for a whole range of things that includes implementation of projects. So that is the buildings and other fixed structures for contractors around the implementation of rural infrastructure projects, the funds to legal services, and relates to just the litigation and legal opinions and state law advisor costs related to the valuation of land. And that last component is related to payments that have been made to land restitution and for compensation to households where there have been disputes. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Beecher to take us through the next few slides.
Thanks, Ulrike, and good morning, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members. So the following slides, really, I will go through them quick, since the colleagues at PBO has already outlined what is contained in the Special Appropriation Bill, but I'll focus a bit on the slides, providing the rationale for the Special Appropriation Bill. In other words, why are we having the Special Appropriation Bill before Parliament? So as an introduction, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members, during the year, as part of the adjustment, the Minister of Finance, through Section 16 of the PFMA, authorized the use of funds in emergency situations for the health sector in response to the PEPFAR withdrawal by the US government. So this slide really just outlined the powers that are vested to the minister in terms of Section 16.1 of the PFMA that authorizes the minister to can use funds in emergency situations. And most important, Chairperson, is Section 16.6 of the PFMA that further states that expenditure in terms of Section 16.1 must be included either in the next adjustment budget for the financial year in which the expenditure is authorized, or in other appropriation legislation. And hence I've underlined that point, because the other appropriation legislation in this case is the Special Appropriation Bill before you. And this is due to the need to comply with 120 days after the minister has authorized the expenditure. In the next slide. Yeah, so this slide shows that on the 25th of June, that's when the minister authorized expenditure in terms of Section 16 of the PFMA, the expenditure of 754.5 million from the National Revenue Fund in response to the PEPFAR withdrawal by the US government. And as required by Section 16.4 of the PFMA, we've also sent the reports immediately within 14 days after the authorization to both Parliament and the Auditor General. And as I said previously, this Special Appropriation Bill before yourselves is introduced before Parliament to comply with Section 16.6 of the PFMA. Next slide. Just a bit of background on the issue of PEPFAR. So over the years, on average, the PEPFAR used to fund around $400 million US annually, or about 7 billion rand per annum, and this funds was channeled mainly through the USAID and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which is CDC. So both CDC and USAID almost contributed sort of half to the 7 billion rand funding that PEPFAR used to provide. And there was also a bit of funding towards research, health research, mainly through the National Institute of Health in the US. So in the main, so what triggered the Section 16 allocation by the minister is that the USAID funding stream has already stopped, as you may have read in the news, and this provided about half of total PEPFAR funding. And on the 15th of May this year, the National Department of Health then approached the National Treasury with a request for Treasury to close the funding gap. Next slide. Yeah, so this slide really just provides the split. I won't dwell much to it because I will also explain it further. Safe to say that the part of the funding, the bulk of the funding, around 590 million, goes to provincial departments of health, and my colleague Dr. Pakis has already touched on this, but it flows as a through the HIV AIDS component of the district health conditional grant, and this fund is specifically and exclusively appropriated, which means that it can't be used within provinces for any other purpose other than what is allocated for. And 132 million rand was towards the South African Medical Research Council to close the gap on the health research. And the smaller component, which is around 32 million rand, was to the National Department of Health for centralized chronic medicine dispensing and distribution and the pharmaceutical supply chain management component. Next slide. Yeah, so since we tabled this special appropriation bill, we've always received questions in terms of where was the funding drawn from. So Section 16.3 of the PFMA indicates that an amount authorized in terms of Section 16 of the PF1 of the PFMA is a direct charge to the National Revenue Fund, and the funds draw down after the minister authorized in terms of Section 16.1 were sourced from the contingency reserve that was part of the 2025 budget. And you may have heard also from the news that recently the US government has approved $115 million, about 2 billion rand, the so-called PEPFAR Bridge Plan, which continues to provide funding for the next 6 months. So it's going to close a gap for the next 6 months until the 31 of March 2026 to sustain South Africa's HIV prevention and treatment programs, mainly through the CDC. But I wish to stress that this is almost 1/3 of the original funding towards PEPFAR. Next slide. Yeah, so this slide really just provides the split, which is already outlined. You can move to the next slide. Yeah, this slide provides the provincial allocations from within the special appropriation bill. So it's sort of split the 590 million across provinces. I've already indicated that this allocation is ring-fenced within the comprehensive HIV AIDS component of the district health conditional grant, and it is specifically and exclusively appropriated. I just wanted to highlight that the Northern Cape was excluded from this allocation as its entire PEPFAR funding is administered through the CDC, and the bigger impact where complete stoppage of funding was for the USAID component of the PEPFAR funding. And with regards to future consideration of this allocation, we are making a point that we are having ongoing discussions with the National Department of Health to assess long-term financial implications to provinces due to this PEPFAR withdrawal, because even the CDC bridge plan. It only closes the gap until March 30, 2026. The next slide, please. So in conclusion, Chairperson, we just want to reiterate that the Minister of Finance authorized 754.5 million as emergency funding in terms of Section 16(1) of the PFMA. And we are introducing this special appropriation bill to comply with Section 16(6) of the PFMA, which requires such expenditure to be included in an appropriation bill within 120 days. And for us, had we waited for the normal adjustment appropriation bill, we would have violated the provisions of Section 16(6). Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Chair. And with 1 minute to spare, we can hand back to you.
Well, in the spirit of inflation targeting, I think you've reduced your time targeted. So congratulations to National Treasury in that regard. Firstly, honorable members, what I'm going to do is, given that it's now 10:30, I want to allow each party to have 15 minutes to ask all its relevant questions. This will give us time for both the parties to ask questions, also for responses to be put forward across all, so that and also give us time so that we can make sure that the meeting does not extend beyond 12, or at least the allocated time it was scheduled to close. So with that in mind, members can split time amongst the various parties, and then we can go from there. And then we take it from there. Let me recognize Honorable Mkhonto. I see your hand. Are there any other hands? Honorable Bateman. I see Honorable Wakelin, Honorable Galega Mazibubo, and Honorable Skete are both on there. That will cover that. So let me begin with you, Honorable Mkhonto. You can ask to both the PBO and the National Treasury, given that both questions, all the presentations, at least we're dealing with three very specific bills, honorable members. I want to caution members also, just to encourage us. This is part of the work that we've got to do in the Money Bills and Related Matters Act, but there are some key decisions that the committee needs to take, because whilst information is noted for the committee, when it comes to adjustments that are beyond 8% that will require our permission, I would urge members to take those into genuine considerations and what those mean. When it comes to the special appropriation that has come through, that already needs to be able to be served before Parliament. And there are a number of adjustments that speak to the Division of Revenue Bill that we need to consider strongly.
Sorry, sir, I'm new. I am being confused by the gadgets. My hand is up, so I'm being confused by the gadgets. I'm sorry. My greetings. This is Honorable Ntuli. Please, I'm sorry. From the ANC. My hand is up also. Sorry for interruptions.
Honorable Ntuli, when I recognize the party in total, we will then go from there. So if I could ask, then I will give everybody an opportunity to go. And then when I get through to you, we will then recognize that. But it is now noted. There's still other hands that will come after that. So, honorable members, let us not, if you like, waste time on matters, on other matters. Let us focus on the three respective bills that are the responsibility of the committee. Honorable Mkhonto, your time, your 15 minutes begin now. You don't have to use all of them. You can use some of them. You can choose how you want to go about it. Let me recognize you. Over to you, Honorable Mkhonto.
Thanks, Chair. Once again, good morning to you, Chair, honorable members, Professor Jantjies and his team, and the team from the National Treasury. Chair, the first question or comment that I have is with regard to the children that live below the upper poverty levels. It is well known that we are having a lot of undocumented citizens in South Africa. I think, Chair, that is the cause of us having many children who cannot access the child support grant. I think we need to engage the Minister of Home Affairs to start a very serious campaign to make sure that these numbers are reduced. The second one, Chair, is the infrastructure grant to the building of schools. We are told that very few schools are being built, and a public schools number has reduced. My question, Chair, is that does that include the mobile classrooms that are mushrooming in South Africa? And in comparison, which is more cost effective, to build a brick and mortar classroom or those mushrooming mobile classrooms and their maintenance? And if the mobile classrooms do meet the basic standards of a classroom according to the South African standards, on the Justice and Correctional Services, Chair, there is a general outcry that South Africa is spending a lot of money to keep each prisoner. Is there any plan to mitigate that? And we are not saying prisoners must be starved or any of their constitutional rights must be undermined. But as it has already started to be in the public domain, I think we have to start thinking about it as to exactly how are we going to make sure that the expenditure, the government expenditure in the prisons is maintained to be low. We can't have, Chair, a department like the Land Reform and Administration to be part of the departments that fall under those who have underspent. We are having a lot of challenges. Our people are having a lot of challenges when it comes to the issue of land. Is it possible, Chair, to get that department to come to this committee and we are able to ask them questions directly as to what is it that they are doing to make sure that the Appropriation Act that was passed not long ago is benefiting the people of South Africa? The fourth one, Chair, is the Disaster Management Fund to the provinces. Chair, is another matter that I think has to be monitored very closely, because as I said yesterday, we are having billions of rands going to these provinces, specifically the Eastern Cape province. But Chair, we don't see the return on investment. The people of the Eastern Cape are suffering. It is now a rainy season. We will be having ISO things that we see on TV. I think, Chair, it's high time that we closely monitor the province of the Eastern Cape as to exactly what do they do with these billions of rands that are being appropriated to them. The last one, Chair, is on the self-financing expenditure that is being appropriated back to the relevant institution. We were having the Department of Communication and Digital Technology not long ago. ICASA complained that when these funds are appropriated back to them, they are not enough. So my question is, Chair, why is ICASA not given enough funds to... I'm being disturbed, Chair, but it's okay.
Honorable Ntuli, can I ask you to mute your device?
When is ICASA going to be given enough money for them to deliver their mandate effectively? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Mkonto. Let me allow the PBO to be the first to respond, and then National Treasury. You can go through the respective questions and go from there. We'll have about 15 minutes. Let me start with Professor Jantjies. You can go.
Thank you, Chair, for the questions. I'll give the team to respond. If there's anything else, then I'll come in. Colleagues, who's going to start?
I'm sorry for disturbance, Chair. Can I be muted, Chair? I don't know what is happening with my gadget. I can't mute myself, both the video and the audio, please.
Okay, that will be done.
Right. I myself am not a technical person, so I see the mute button is on. Let's, Mashile, if you can assist in that regard. Professor Jantjies, you can proceed. Thank you.
Yes. Lilia, do you want to start with the response?
I have nothing to respond, Dr. Jantjies.
The question around the infrastructure, there's a question around justice. Colleagues, do you pick up the questions? Because I see that let me see. Any questions from your side, colleagues?
I can quickly respond on the disaster management. Apologies, Chairperson, that I don't have my video on. I'm not feeling well. But to say that the questions about oversight over disaster management spending is important. And I think it's important for the members to also be aware that there's been a lot of cumulative damage that has been made in terms of natural disasters. So we kind of need to be thinking about the expenditure in the past, but also expenditure in the future to address those cumulative impacts on communities, which is why I think, National Treasury has implemented a new category in terms of disaster management, which then takes into account expenditure that, is lagging in a sense, that wasn't adequate to begin with to deal with the disasters when they occurred. So just to emphasize again that, in terms of oversight on disaster management is not to think, 10 billion was allocated this year and what has it done, but to also think about, what I'm saying is that the past impacts and the lag, therefore. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say on disaster management allocations and oversight.
Thank you, Musa. I think just the one point for myself, Chair, just encompass some of the questions is really around the formula for allocation to different functions or different sectors. Certainly, the formula takes into account some of these matters that Honorable Mkonto phrased, including the population. Certainly, it warrants more deeper insight to understand the implication of undocumented people in the spending. But I think that's why our call for looking at the spending really in line with the outcomes. And I think it's worth going deeper than just allocations. But just to confirm, understanding the allocation is based on the formula which takes into account some of these factors raised by Honorable Mkonto. Then there has to be a response back to say how far the spending has really been able to address some of the concerns that we made. The issue of infrastructure grants remain a concern for us within all the spheres of government, but also the infrastructure spending as a whole. It remains a major issue, and we haven't looked at deeper into the move in shutting some of the allocations. I think it's worth National Treasury responding what informs some of the shutting some of the grants, and how does that deals with the outcome expected within these spheres of government in particular. I'll stop there, Chair, and I think many of the questions probably are well vested in National Treasury responding to some of these questions.
Yes. DDG, let me allow you to proceed if the questions directed to you, if you can begin to respond on that score.
Chair, I'm going to ask the team to come in. So we'll start on, most of them are comments, but we will respond on the school's backlogs and in education, and then just on the disasters and ICASA. Thanks. Spencer, please come in, and then Teresa.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not sure if I'm audible and visible, but let me start with the response to the infrastructure grant questions, or question around the movement of the shift from the school's backlogs grant and those funds being shifted into the education infrastructure grant. And just start off with a bit about the justification for this. So the backlogs grant was an indirect grant. In other words, it was implemented by the National Department. They were in effect taking over the role that has been assigned to provinces, which is to provide the school infrastructure in their respective provinces. And at this point, provinces, the education infrastructure grant, which is a direct grant to provinces, is much bigger. Provinces have been increasing their capacity to use that funding appropriately, and the National Department needs to strengthen their capacity to lead and direct and plan for the sector as a whole, including in terms of infrastructure. And so that is why the funding is moving back into the education infrastructure grant for provinces to carry out what they effectively meant to be doing. And then at the same time to beef up National's capacity to provide the planning and direction for that implementation. And that will be phased in, but that doesn't mean that backlogs will now be moved out of the equation. In fact, the funding that's coming from the backlogs grant into the EIG will still be earmarked in the EIG for provinces to address backlogs where they continue to exist. On the question of the mobile classrooms essentially are only meant to be for emergency accommodation at schools. In other words, when there isn't enough time to build the additional classrooms or fix classrooms that were damaged by weather or fire or any other issues. So it's meant to be an interim measure. And we share your concern where the interim measures linger way beyond an interim period. But that's what it's meant to be, because it's quick. You can get the mobile classroom up and at the school within a couple of days. Whereas you can't, that takes you much longer to plan and build a school with brick and mortar. So the brick and mortar buildings are better value in the short and long term, but particularly over the long term, and it is still the preferred method. The mobile classrooms are meant to be an interim emergency measure while the planning and all the other preparation for a more permanent solution is put in place. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the disaster side, we do agree and recognize the need for increased monitoring of performance on disaster allocation. We are in discussions with NDMC on how to improve the allocations, but also we're engaging with DBSA to see whether we can find ways of improving monitoring and understanding how disaster funds are utilized at both provinces and local government. The big challenge we see is just overall maintenance of infrastructure. If that is not taken seriously, then any other type of rain or minor disaster end up with major damages. So that is one of the things that we're trying to strengthen around maintenance, but also preparedness and making sure that when we respond to disaster measures, we do respond better. On the ICASA front, we are in discussion with DCDT and also with ICASA on the financing model for most of the entities within the department, and also looking at ICASA as to where the needs are and how else could they be improving the mechanism for raising resources. And the self-financing element is one of the issues that will come up. So we haven't finalized anything in that regard. So we'll pursue the discussion there. Thank you.
Chair, just to add on the CASA issue, so to answer this question specifically from Honourable Nkonto around dealing with the self-funding opportunities, there's no direct relationship between ICASA's cost of regulation and the license fees that they collect, which is what is different, say, for example, within the Department of Home Affairs, where the license fees is directly, or not the license, the fees that they collect from the public, from documents, is directly related to the costs associated with that. But like the Beth had said, this is there's an ongoing conversation around the cost of regulation given ICASA's mandate and a new funding model that we are waiting for the department to propose to us. Thank you very much.
Okay, Chair, maybe to add, good morning, Chair and honourable members. Ohala Litsing as well from National Treasury from Intergovernmental Relations Division. Maybe just to add on why we see that maybe fewer schools these days in terms of the number are declining. So part of it, Chair, is the population dynamics that affect that. That needs to be taken into account. So some of the smaller schools have been closed in provinces, and you'll find that sometimes there are more primary schools in the same place, so therefore there are not enough children in a particular area, so therefore there's a need for that. And just to indicate that in addition to what Spencer said, there's 15.7 billion this year just for education infrastructure grant that goes to provinces. On the disaster funding to provinces, we do have monetary mechanisms. So fortunately, this funding is allocated through conditional grants, as Dr. Pakis has presented. So therefore, we're able to receive reports monthly and quarterly in terms of what is being spent, and even in terms of performance, how are they performing in that regard. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Let me now recognize Honourable Bateman and Honourable Waitlin from the DA. Your 15 minutes begin now. You can go.
Okay, I'll go first. Thank you, Honourable Chair, and thank you to the PBO and National Treasury for your presentations. I'd like to just pick up firstly on the NSFAS, the deficit of 14 billion. And the concern about the sustainability. I did ask a question of this previously, and the response that I got from National Treasury was that the Treasury is not too concerned about it. The fact that it's been raised again today is what's alerting me to this, and I do think we should have our eye on it because of the importance of the stability of our campuses next year, and of course the numbers are large as well, and have a significant impact on the fiscus. So the answer that I received from the Treasury was that the Treasury is not too worried about it and that NSFAS should be able to sort it out. So my question is, does NSFAS have the power to be able to reset the criteria for funding in order to be able to fit within its budget? And also, is it actually practical and realistic and implementable, this solution, given that most of the students requiring funding from NSFAS are already in courses at universities and colleges? I would feel more comfortable about this if I had a bit more concrete information in terms of what the plan is and how the NSFAS is going to be able to be empowered and practically implement a solution to live within its means in a way that's practical. Then the PBO presenter made the comment that some of the rollovers don't meet the criteria for rollovers, and I would like to ask if we can double click on that and perhaps ask the PBO for a list of the expenses that have been classified under rollovers which don't qualify legally as rollovers in the view of the PBO, with the reasons for that. And then if we can ask the Treasury to respond to that. I think that's probably going to need to a written exercise involving both the PBO and the National Treasury. But Chair, through you, I'd like to request that. And then the matter of SAPS and also the Justice and Constitutional Development shifting funds from compensation of employees to goods and services and other categories. The concern, obviously, is that our visible policing is very stretched. And in the Western Cape, where I'm based, the numbers of police officers in visible policing have been declining over the last few years. And there is, it's hard to exaggerate the level of disappointment with the impact of the police in the Western Cape in some communities. So the response that we've received from the Treasury is that they're using savings that are generated because trainees were not employed at the beginning of the year, and so that gave rise to savings. Fair enough, but I want to ask how rigorously the Treasury has actually analysed that. Have you done a deep dive into those numbers to make sure that 932 million rand can be explained with that explanation? And that it's not going to just be a recurring problem. And then, so I would like to ask if the Treasury has done that deep dive, if you could also, again, provide that to the committee. And then I'd also like to ask, again, the PBO to analyse what the Treasury provides and to help us to evaluate whether it is a full and satisfactory response to the question. And then there's also a knock-on question, which is if SAPS needs 930 million rand for maintaining software systems and other things, what are those expenses? Are they recurring expenses? In which case, is this a problem every year, or is there some kind of project that's being funded with the money? I think I would like to have some comfort from Treasury and cross-examined by the PBO for our benefit that 932 million rand is actually being used well and fruitfully, especially given the levels of corruption that have been exposed in the National Police Service. My questions are very similar on the Justice and Constitutional Development side. There we're seeing 405 million rand moved from compensation of employees to goods and services, machinery and equipment, buildings and other fixed structures. Now, again, this department, the NPA is not living up to the expectations that we have of it in terms of what we need it to be doing for the country. We have backlogs in our courts and concerns around their functioning, and yet we have 400 million that's being moved, where it was planned, obviously, for positions that have been created. And can we ask, again, has the National Treasury done a deep dive analysis of this? Can we please have that, a written response from National Treasury? And again, can we ask the PBO to help us by evaluating the explanation from National Treasury? And then on the TARS program, do we have a target for how much we're trying to save from the TARS program? Are all the departments cooperating well with that? And I appreciate an update on that. Then there's also a figure of 5.1 billion, which is called National Government Projected Underspending. Is it usual for this to be recognised in the adjustments budget? And also, what is the 1 billion rand that's described as local government repayments to the National Revenue Fund? Thanks, Chair. I'll hand over to my colleague, through you.
Thank you, Honourable Wakeling.
Good morning, Chair, and to the colleagues. Thank you very much. I'll be succinct and short to the point. First and foremost, to the PBO, thank you for a great presentation. I think we'll be using that very strongly this time around, and particularly on the critical assessment on some of the number of the issues they've raised in the last few slides. All my questions are directed to National Treasury. I've got 4. The first one is around the Metro Trading Services. So yesterday when we had a conversation with Salga and with the FFC, it came to light that Salga's biggest concern is that the Metro Trading Service will have a knock-on effect on increase of expenditure to the consumers, and then FFC had a similar view, although they suggested a slight increase, which will result in better control and in a long-term reduction. I would like National Treasury to please explain to me, have they actually considered the cost impact of the Metro Trading Services? And I know the additional funding has been allocated now, but does that now include possible slight increase or increases to consumers, which we definitely don't want to see happening? The second matter is around the MIC grants or the municipal infrastructure grants. And yes, it's obviously critical that we do that. There is an additional concern that was raised around that yesterday by Salga, that it will actually have an additional burden effect on local government around the maintenance of any of these new infrastructures that are developed. So the question I'm asking is, National Treasury, when you do consider the MIC grants, is there a follow-up around the maintenance of these infrastructure, or are we going to continue building new buildings as opposed to or building a new infrastructure as opposed to maintaining the current ones that we've got? And I know the target set and that's part of the concern, is that the target set is around 8% of asset value, which is not reachable at the moment. I think we're at 3.5%, if I'm correct. So if National Treasury can just maybe explain that conundrum and possibly spend more money on maintenance as opposed to additional infrastructure. Then on my colleague's follow-up question on the TARS, my concern is more around the reliance on the GTEC assessments that were done many years ago. And we're talking to 2014, 2015. And subsequent to that, in my question to both Salga and FFC, it seemed to me that they are concerned about utilizing the current TARS on that baseline, as many of the contexts have changed in local government. And I would like to have an understanding if the TARS impact, if they actually considered utilizing that baseline, and why would they still continue doing that as opposed to looking at new assessments being done. Then the last question, Chair, is around the special appropriation matter. The President in a G20, and we had a wonderful G20, and let me just applaud whoever was involved in that. Well done. We showcased wonderful to the world. But the President has committed 600 million to the Global Fund on HIV, AIDS, TB, and malaria. I would like to know if that is actually being funded for this financial year. When is that commitment? Now the commitment has been made. When will that be paid? And what impact will it have on the current health department? Number one. Number two, can we receive some funds back in the Global Fund? And is that all been quantified as yet? Or is that was just a political commitment that was made? Thank you, Chair. I'm done for the day.
Thank you, Honourable. Thank you, Honourable Waitlin. Let me begin with the PBO. We will have a globular time collectively between you and National Treasury. There were a number of questions that are on the go. So I want to try and allocate 15 minutes to go towards that. So you can begin, and then we will cede the rest of the time, obviously, to National Treasury in the questions that were asked to them. There were few to PBO, but the majority went to NT. So let's go that way. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, members. You're right. I think we have one question. The rest will be, I think, two. The rest will be to the National Treasury colleagues. I think the one I'll answer, then I'll give to Nelia to come on roll overs. We will wait for the response because Honourable Bateman referred us to look at some of the response and provide insight where required. We will wait for those response. We'll have to dive quite deep into that on few of the response from the Treasury. Nelia, do you want to speak to rollovers, specifically those we concerned about them not meeting the requirements? Do you have the details of those?
Yes,
okay,
yes, I can. The point that I wanted to make is we don't have all that detailed information to assess all these rollovers. But what is suspicious is if there's a transfer that has been rolled over and why that transfer hasn't been effected in 2024-25. And then there's also a few rollovers for the G20. So as I say, we don't have all the information, but I don't know if there was in the 2024-25 budget already money allocated for the G20. That was just the point that I wanted to make. And then Honourable Wakeland also spoke about the TARS. In our pre-emptive PPS, we made the point that Treasury referred us or referred in their guidelines to a website where there was a few reviews that has been done before. So all those reviews were actually outdated. So they can't actually, as you said, Honourable Baitland, or those reviews cannot be used for current budget decisions. And most of those reviews were also done by consultants. So the concern is whether it's expected of provinces and departments to continue to do their own reviews if they don't have budget to use consultants to do the reviews, or whether GTAC will continue as they are doing at the moment to assist with all the reviews. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair. I will give the National Treasury colleagues to respond. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So IGR will go first this time. Jan, can I ask you to deal with the local government, the surrender of rollovers not committed and the MIC, and even if you want to touch on the SALGA issue? Over to you.
Good morning, Honourable Chair and the members of this platform. So thanks for those questions, Chairperson and the colleagues. With regard to the COCTA issue, or the money that's been declared by municipalities, Chair, as part of the Division of Revenue Act, the National Treasury have a responsibility for monitoring and oversight. So we also run a process on municipal rollovers. We also, as part of the monitoring, when we concluded that process, we obviously check whether municipalities have used the funding appropriated by Parliament in the Division of Revenue Act / Bill, whether it's been used for the intended purposes. As we conclude that process annually, we look at the amount that municipalities have in their banks, whether if they declare an unspent amount, whether there's cash in the bank, and if we then come to the conclusion, Chair, that the money was not used for the intended purposes, then the Division of Revenue Act allows us to offset that amount from the equitable share. So that's a long-standing arrangement that's in place, and we exercise that annually. And the amount that we then pencil in when the medium-term budget policy statement and even the main budget is concluded is the estimated amount. So, Chair, the amount that's been disclosed is then as a result of that process that's been institutionalized. So I think that was the question from Honourable Bateman. As far as the Metro Trading Services reform, Honourable Wakeland, the intention is certainly not to use this incentive grant. It is essentially to facilitate a process where in the metro space that they really look after their assets, because we have, as part of this process, came to the conclusion as part of our monitoring and oversight visits that the metros is not necessarily investing sufficiently in maintaining their assets. And in the case of local government, the assets do matter. Those assets do generate revenue. So there's certainly not, I don't think it's factually correct that the colleagues that have indicated that there's a probability that tariffs will increase and therefore the cost will be given over to the community. So that's certainly not our understanding and certainly not how the program has been designed. So the incentive part is to facilitate a process where the municipalities and the metro specific investment in infrastructure and all the tariff services which is their core mandate, is supposed to generate surpluses that they can then use to invest back into the maintenance of that infrastructure. Chair, as far as the question on MIC, the Treasury have a ratio, as the Honourable Member has indicated, a norm of 8%. And every year when we conclude the consolidated or the aggregate budget publication for local government, we then determine whether we are seeing progress. I think the 4%, which means the practice by municipalities to look after their assets, is something that we have to work hard to resolve. In the MIC, also a provision that we have built in, which Parliament endorsed, Honourable Chair, to make provision that municipalities can use a portion of the MIC grant to look after their assets. And this is something that we need much more work as a collective. The agency that assists municipalities in this regard, the MISA, is located under COPTA, and they have the expertise to help municipalities, to improve when they do their project pipelines and even their maintenance plans. But generally speaking, Chair, this is the area where we need to put in much more effort and get municipalities to understand that even though they do receive grants, that they have a responsibility themselves to look after their assets. Harley, I hope I've covered the parts that you want me to cater for. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Just to add one thing on the issue of MIC, probably the question was also touching on the proposal that moving forward also MISA and ODBSA implement on behalf of municipalities, and where the worry is whether they'll do new infrastructure. And I think the point that Jan made, that those two institutions, they will implement what's in the plans of the municipalities. They will not necessarily come with their new projects which are not on the plans of municipalities. So essentially it will help municipalities that don't have capacity to implement, whether it's to upgrade or to refurbish some infrastructure that are already existing. So it will be in line with the infrastructure plans of a particular municipality. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We're now going to go through to now Honorable Galega Mazibuko, Honorable Skete, and Honorable Ntuli. Your 15 minutes effectively starts now, and you can split it in whichever way you choose to do so. Over to you, Honorable Galega Mazibuko.
Okay, technology, I'm trying to unmute and it doesn't want to unmute. Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning once more to yourself. Good morning to members on the platform and to PPO as well as National Treasury. We appreciate the presentations we have received this morning, Chair. Firstly, Chairperson, my anxiety is on the added equitable share, as well as the municipal infrastructure grant changes, which is reliable more on data. And my anxiety is based on what we heard yesterday, that the departments are still using the old data from Stats SA. Stats SA has not yet released the current data, and therefore they are working on the 2011 data. So for me is that any allocation will then be affected by this, because the numbers that the allocation is based on is not necessarily the exact numbers that are there in the municipalities, with the movement of people from one province to another, especially from rural areas, which will affect the data for rural areas, as well as people that are moving to cities. So how accurate is this allocation? And the other one is on the disasters. I think, Chair, we are very reactive when it comes to disasters. Because even this allocation is talking about the areas where the disasters have already occurred. So it means we want to be caught napping in the future disasters, because climate change is still here to stay. But for me, it looks like our allocation is not preparing for the future disasters. Chair, the Minister of Finance has authorized the early release of 9.7 billion in 25-26 to address urgent pressures in provincial education and health departments. He also approved emergency funding amounting to 590 million as presented. In terms of Section 16, subsection 1 of the Public Finance Management Act, to support provincial departments of health. All these allocations, Chair, were made outside the 2025 Division of Revenue Bill. On what basis did Treasury then choose to release 9.7 billion for education and health and 590 million for PEPFAR outside the Division of Revenue Bill process? And how is Parliament expected to exercise effective appropriation oversight when such major allocations are made off bill? And Chair, how does National Treasury reconcile these allocations with the constitutional requirement for Parliament to maintain full visibility over appropriation funds? Is Treasury not effectively sidelining Parliament by processing over 10 emergency allocations outside the 2025 Division of Revenue Bill, thereby weakening transparency and shifting budget authority away from Parliament? And my last question, Chair, on the adjustment bill. The Adjusted Appropriation Bill 2025, Chair, shows 1 billion rollover in communications and digital technologies, largely driven by payment towards goods and services for SA Connect program. Why is the SA Connect program still experiencing massive rollover more than a decade after inception? What is the impact of these delays on digital access commitments and digital economy? For the SA Connect program, facing delays and rollovers, Chair, what is the estimated cost escalation? How much extra will Treasury pay because project timelines were not met? Has Treasury quantified the financial losses linked to SA Connect program year-on-year project delays, Chair? Thank you very much. I'll hand over to my two colleagues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
As
Honorable Skete.
Indicated.
No, thank you, Chair, for the opportunity. Chair, my question will be to National Treasury. On what basis was the projected underspending of 6.1 billion reduction removed, given that spending pressures and capacity constraints remain unchanged, making the adjustment appear fiscally inconsistent? And my second question, Chair, is that if unexpected events occurred, why did Treasury not use the contingency reserve, which is already set aside for unforeseen events, rather than change the equitable share allocations during the year? In other words, what prevented Treasury from using existing contingency reserves rather than altering equitable share baseline media? And my other question, Chair, It's on the adjusted appropriation bill. Is that, Chair, the adjusted appropriation budget bill indicates that a significant portion of unforeseeable and unavoidable and exceptional expenditure relates to infrastructure destroyed by recent floods, while the same areas receive disaster funds in previous financial years. How does Treasury assess whether line departments are adequately climate-proofing infrastructure to avoid repeat unforeseeable and unavoidable allocations? What percentage of infrastructure expenditure over the past 3 financial years has gone to rehabilitation versus new infrastructure? And is this trend sustainable? If a large share of infrastructure spending goes to repairing flood damage, how is Treasury ensuring that long-term developmental projects are not being systematically crowded out by this? Since there is a reoccurrence of flood damages in the same provinces and municipalities, what steps will Treasury take to stop the pattern of destroy, rebuild, destroy using national funds? What mechanisms exist to ensure that provinces and municipalities actually implement quality rehabilitation, and how will Treasury monitor value for money? And my last question, Chair, is several departments and entities, that is basic education, public service commission, health, independent police, investigating directorate, military veterans, communication and digital technologies, etc., require parliamentary approval because environments exceed thresholds. What governance failures necessitated such large in-year reallocations? Why were program budgets so misaligned with actual needs only 6 months into the 2025-2026 financial year? That is my question, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Nduli.
Thank you very much, Chair. Greetings to you and all honourable members and the guests. I am very sorry also for causing some interruptions on your welcoming note yesterday, Chair. You said I've been updated now. I think in 20 thank you very much for the opportunity. And I have 2 questions. It's on the division of revenue and also on the adjustment bill. Firstly, on the division of revenue, I would like to ask which independent data quality checks were undertaken to confirm the population figures driving the 4.6 billion provincial equitable share revision for Gauteng, Free State, and the Northwest? And how can Treasury assure revisions based on updated population data? Why was a corresponding adjustment not reflected in the local government equitable share formula, which is also population sensitive? How does Treasury justify correcting provincial allocations without undertaking an equivalent correction for municipalities, despite both peers relying on democratic indicators? And my second question on the adjustment bill is the adjusted appropriation budget bill shows, the adjustment appropriation bill shows 14.8 billion system of spending inefficiency. In light of the systematic inefficiency, how can Treasury claim to run a sound and credible fiscal policy when billions of rands are repeatedly underspent or returned to the fiscus each year? What accountability measures exist for accounting officers who repeatedly preside over systematic spending inefficiencies? I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Ntuli. May I request for future purposes, I didn't want to disrupt you, that in the committee, when a member is posing a question or speaking, they normally have their cameras on. So if I can ask that be addressed in the near future, or if there's a problem, to request such through the chair if you are unable to, for whatever reason.
Thank you very much, Chair, but I tried, then the camera said you cannot start your video because the host has disabled it. It has been disabled by the host. I'm sorry for that. Thank you.
Understandably so. I see, Honorable Siate, your hand is up. You have 2 minutes and 30 seconds remaining to ask the questions. You can proceed.
Morning, Chair. And all other honorable members on the platform. I also would like to request, I have issues where I am, as you would have noticed, I've even had struggled with just indicating my hand and all of that. But I have 2 questions. I hope I will put it in 2 minutes. So, Chair, the social development declared 1 billion underspending on social grants. And does this indicate administrative inefficiency, inaccurate beneficiaries, modeling or exclusive errors in SRD and other grants payments? Could the lower than the projected uptake in the social grant system be signaling barriers to access, either administrative, technological, or eligibly related, then the Treasury should address? And then the adjusted appropriation bill 2025 shows a 1 billion rollover in communications and digital technologies, largely driven by payments towards goods and services for SA Connect program. Why is the SA Connect program still experiencing massive rollovers more than a decade after inception? What is the impact of these delays on digital access commitment and a digital economy? For the SA Connect program facing delays and rollovers, what is the estimated cost escalation? And how much extra will Treasury pay because project timelines were not met? Has Treasury quantified the financial losses linked to the SA Connect program year project delays? Thank you, Chair. That will be my 2 questions.
No, thank you, Honourable Member, and thank you for sticking to the time. Let me allow both the PBO and the National Treasury. Again, I think the bulk of the questions have gone to National Treasury. Let me allow the response. Prof, you can go, and then National Treasury.
I think, Chair, thank you so much, Chair. The bulk of the questions naturally are for the National Treasury. So there wasn't a specific question from our side, but we've noted the Honourable Bateman's points on the platform, the chats. We'll pick those up and follow up based on the response from the National Treasury. Thank you so much. Let me give the National Treasury colleagues opportunity to respond. Thank you so much, Chair.
Chair, thank you. Just from the previous round, Chair, you didn't give us an opportunity to answer questions on the national the national aspects of the budget, but we only answered on the subnational aspects. And with your guidance, I'd like to know if we could also, in this round, also answer those questions that related to the TARS, what's happening on the NSFAS budget, and what's happening on the compensation of employees in justice and police. So we will go, Chair, in the order of responding to each of those, and then also taking the questions specific to us from this round. So we'll start off with Spencer on NSFAS, go to justice and police.
If you can, DDG, just keep in mind that at the end, we've got one more member and party, and then at the end, in our engagement with you and me, you can respond to some of the national questions that need to go. I want for members more the specific rounds that deals with the questions that the members have asked to be addressed. Thank you.
Okay. So we will be brief, Chair. So Spencer, Rendani, Pebetse, Bashudu, please, in that order.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Chair. I'm going to answer the question by Honourable Bateman on NSFAS. So yes, we are comfortable with the plans that NSFAS have indicated they've made for the current year. But of course, that also has potential carry-through costs. And there are measures being implemented that don't require a major reset of criteria by NSFAS that are include, for example, the recoveries process by the SIU that is ongoing. 2 billion has been recovered from that process, and that will help offset the current year's deficit, but they've identified over 5 billion that is still outstanding in that regard. Then there are also about 46 billion rand outstanding debt from previous students that received loans, and we are pushing NSFAS to try and get closer to that, to recover that those debts. But to your question about whether they have the power to reset the criteria, in some cases, yes, but essentially that is an issue that collectively between the Department of Higher Education and through their leadership really in this case, and NSFAS, if there are any criteria that need to be reset, they'd have to do it in that regard. I can say that obviously the detail, I think NSFAS and DHE will need to provide, but that they have picked up discussions with student formations about some of those considerations. We also have asked NSFAS to tighten their controls so that there isn't this need for the SIU to go out and recover overpayments and incorrect payments, both to universities and students. And so those are all some of the measures that they will be implementing in the short term to address some of these the issues related to the carry-through year or the possible carry-through. Thanks.
Good morning, honorable members. It's Randani here. I will deal with the questions raised by Honorable Bateman in relation to police and justice. In the main, looking at the subs personnel numbers, and this is something that we also report in our quarterly SCOA reports. We've got a section then there on personnel.
Randani, let me, with respect, I appreciate that there are questions now put on the chat that Honorable Bateman has put through. But I had requested with the DDG that the questions asked from the members who had just spoken. Otherwise, what you can then end up happening is you can utilize your time, then ask questions in the group. It discriminates against other parties. So can I ask that you respond, National Treasury responds to the questions up front. I had given the directive to say, when it comes to the end, we will then respond accordingly to the questions that Honorable Bateman had put forward. Honorable Bateman, I see your hand, but the questions have been put on the group, if I'm not mistaken.
Chair, yes, that's absolutely correct. And I don't really mind how they are answered, so long as they're answered. But I would just point out that this is almost word for word what I asked when I had my opportunity to ask questions. So they're not new questions. That's all I'm saying.
Yes, I'm not declining that point. I'm just merely saying in the interest of fairness, let us stick to the allocations as we put forward. And I did indicate I will then revert back to the questions that are national in nature in the group towards the end.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Okay, Chair, then maybe I should briefly just go through those in relation to the violence and the SA Connect issues. So we have two components of SA Connect, which is phase 1 and phase 2. And a large chunk of what's happened in phase 2 is that it's a fixed allocation for CapEx expenditures that comes to an end. So the rollover is really to complete the outstanding work around all of that. We don't anticipate any expenditure increases or any cost increases associated with this because that part of the phase 2, at least the construction component of that part of phase 2, then comes to an end. In relation to disasters, Chair, around unforeseeable and unavoidable expenditure and being kind of the budget almost being biased towards disaster response as opposed to dealing with mitigation, risk reduction, and preparedness. The Disaster Management Act, the framework at least that is provided for in the Disaster Management Act, does focus on preparedness, risk reduction. The most cost-effective way to respond to a disaster is related to reducing the costs or reducing the risks associated with this. So the honourable member is correct that it's in the planning phase where this matters a lot than in the response phase. And in terms of the Disaster Management Act, each institution of the state is required to have a disaster management plan to deal with all of this. Some of the risk reduction factors that we then have to respond to relates to asset management and maintenance. So, for example, road damage from flooding comes from a result of drains not being cleaned, culverts not being cleared. So there's a large component of what happens with that to reduce all of that. And the Department of Cooperative Governance with the National Disaster Management Act is looking into how they are able to provide support to provinces and municipalities to strengthen the planning aspects and the mitigation aspects related to disaster preparedness. And the honourable member is correct that it does seem to happen. I mean, flood risks seem to be in the same parts of the country every year. And lots of focus is being placed around all of that. Chair, just to say that we had produced and published a disaster risk financing strategy, which is a multi-layered approach. With that, we've also published a survey of these high-risk municipalities and what needs to happen around all of that. So we are aware of where work needs to happen, and the National Disaster Management Centre with the Department of Cooperative Governance is looking at how they are able to then prioritize those municipalities around the way where we have the highest risks in relation to disasters. Then just on environments and shifts and planning, I mean, this is probably a weakness that we do have in the system, but when priorities and things shift within a department. So, I mean, the reason why we have the environments rules is to provide flexibility to accounting officers to make changes as things change. Sometimes we're not able to predict the future as well as we can, well, as well as we should, at least in relation to some things like infrastructure. And how we then, so I mean, we should be concerned when departments do make significant shifts, because it means that something is wrong in the planning. Our conversations with departments does relate to what's really happening within the budget and how they mitigate the risks and what are they giving up, which is why in the estimates of national expenditure, where you do see those large variations, is you're also seeing an adjustment to the performance indicators associated with that. Just the question from the last one from Honourable Ntuli about what are the accountability measures. I mean, those are clearly defined in the PFMA in sections 81 and 83 of the PFMA that says that when accounting officers have committed financial misconduct, what needs to happen, and the definitions around what is in financial misconduct relates to accounting officer responsibilities that are set out in sections 38 and 51 of the PFMA. And this relates specifically to the management of expenditure and the efficient and effectiveness of expenditure in relation to their responsibilities to prevent irregular expenditure and unauthorized expenditure. So those accountability measures that are governed in sections 81 and 83 of the PFMA is also then confirmed, I think, is in Treasury Regulation 33. I'm going to hand over to the colleagues in IGR to respond to the intergovernmental issues. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ulrike. Dr. Pakis, can you respond on the data question? I'll respond to the provisional allocation. Thank you.
No, thanks, DDG. I think the question from Honourable Ntuli on which independent data quality checks we use for the cushioning. So, honourable members, just important to perhaps indicate that the Budget Council, where the Minister of Finance as well as the MECs of Finance sit had endorsed that the formula updates take into account the latest available and credible data there is. So between the 2024 and the 2025 MTF periods, using the mid-year population estimates as well as the provincial GDP data, which were the most available credible information at the time, that's where the cushioning discussion started, because these three provinces were then adversely impacted. So it is within the context of using the most recent and up-to-date data, and it came from Stats SA. Unfortunately, honorable members, with regards to the local government equitable share, is that the mid-year population estimates are at a provincial level, so it's about population. However, the funding of municipalities is actually at a household level, which is where, again, the question from Honorable Mazibuko, Taleka Mazibuko, comes in around the dated information, because that is the information then that was last made available to us in the 2011 census around the poor households. So this is the data that we have been waiting from Stats SA, with the latest indication that we're likely to get this particular segment of the data in 2027 financial year as well. So there are gaps in terms of how we're able to update the data for local government, and as far as due to the unavailability of data. But I think, honorable members, it should not be seen as local government being shortchanged in the process, because over the years we have been growing the number of households that are benefiting from the subsidy that government provides. Just to give you a rough estimate, we provide for 11.2 million households, poor households, through the local government equitable share. But there's obviously leakages in the system, because only 3.2 at most actually receive these subsidies in terms of the poor households that are getting the benefit from this. So there's a huge chunk in between that are not getting this. So I don't think the credibility around the allocations can then be attributed to the data issues. Of course, we are concerned, and one of the areas that we have explored with SSA is how we can also start to look at some administrative data that could be useful. So we have explored the SASA data, which also wasn't so conducive for the household level data that is required at a municipal level as well. But we continue to engage Stats SA, and our DG has returned to the Statistician General to really get to the bottom of this kind of support that can be provided to Stats SA, so that they can also be able to assist us with the most up-to-date level of data that would then be useful for the purposes of updating the poor households at a municipal level as well. Thanks, DG.
Thank you, Letsepa. So, Chair, the last question from our side is on what basis we allocated the provisional allocations for education and health outside division of revenue. So the whole idea, Honorable Chair, was not to sideline Parliament, but we were looking at service delivery in the sense that the amounts was approved by minister, and we gazetted the allocation so that the provinces can get money as soon as possible, because members will recall that if the money was going to go through the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill, they'll have to wait until it's an act in January, and only then money can flow from January onwards, which leaves only less than 3 months for provinces to spend 9.7 billion. So hence we thought that it's important that we release money immediately. So through the Section 6 of the Appropriation Act that we used, we're able to make sure that we release money so that because part of it was to deal with accruals from the previous financial year, and part of it was to use for compensation, dealing with the current pressures that are in the system, as well as to appoint doctors, unemployed doctors outside after ComServe. So those are important because they've already started employing those doctors, so they needed to pay. Thank you very much.
Let me at this point, I want to recognize Honorable Mwali. And then I see the questions in the group. If there are some that can be answered via text, they can be. If you can type it into the group so that we don't interrupt the flow. But after this, we will then deal with some of the more national questions, and then we'll keep going. Honorable Mwali, your time starts now. You can proceed.
Thank you, Chair. May I keep my video off? Am I audible?
You are audible. You can proceed.
Thank you, Chair. With all due respect, may I send my questions in writing because I'm about to put the now. So I want to do justice to my questions. If I'm asking now, because I thought by this time I would have asked my question. That's fine.
Yes, that's understandable, Honorable Mwali. You can make submissions. May I ask you that at least in future, the meeting was scheduled to finish at 12, so if you couldn't, if you submit, then an apology so that we can note it in the meeting. Then I could have made arrangements for you to go even earlier, if that's a possibility.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll do that.
If you can, I would appreciate that. With that, so does that mean you won't be asking? You will send them in writing. I will appreciate that.
Send them in writing.
Let me then, DDG, if you can begin some of the questions around the group. I have some that we can begin to answer, to engage on. So let's begin with some of that are in the group, and then then I'll have some questions for you.
Okay, Chair, thank you. So Rendani, can you continue with answering the questions in the chat about the police and justice? We will also ask Dr. Bicha Mashuri to come in on the questions around the special appropriation bill and on the social development and what's happening on the social grants in here. Thanks.
Thanks, Ulrike and honorable members. I will try to be short. I think the details can be in writing, but just to indicate that police and justice or security departments, they are labor-intensive department. When we look at the department like police with an establishment of 188,000 and the way it recruits, we will never have police at full employment. For example, you're going to have trainees that will be in colleges for 9 months. And during that period, you're going to have officials leaving the department through natural attrition. It could be resignation, death, etc., etc. So, for example, in the current financial year, we just have permanent absorption of these trainees in August, I think 1,900. And now in November, we have got 3,500 people who graduated, the trainees who are constables. In February, we're going to have the enlistment of about 5,000 as a result of the additional allocation that we've been providing over the years. So the savings emanate from the vacant post because the trainees are still in colleges. And during that period, people are leaving, or the officials are leaving. And where the money is going mainly to computer services because their business is IT driven, which they get an assistance from CETA, mainly for the existing systems. And as part of that, we also have the fluctuation of the rand having an impact on their budget, hence these environments. And again, they're also in the process of upgrading some of their systems. So that's in short. And again, if you look at the police numbers within a year, you'll find starting with higher numbers and they go down. And after some point, the numbers go up because of the absorption of these trainees. But the details, Honorable Bateman, can be in writing. Justice is the same, it's labor intensive. I think we've got at about 24,000. Yes, you are right, 143 million environment. It's on we've got two programs that are labor intensive, the NPA and the court services. So 143 in the NPA moving from COE to other areas, but the details can be in writing. Thanks.
Yeah. So, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members, I'm going to address two questions very quickly. The one was raised by Honorable Wakeling earlier on the Special Appropriation Bill, particularly on the issue of the pledge by the President to the Global Fund. Yes, we are aware that the President has pledged around 630 million rand to the Global Fund for the next round of replenishment. But I wish to indicate that the pledge consists of the component that is contributed by the government, and the bulk of that pledge is going to be contribution from the private sector within the country. At the moment, we don't have the splits, but we know that the country contributes around 26 million US dollars in the next round. But I wish to also indicate that even over the next 3 years, the country is going to benefit much more, because the Global Fund has pledged around 400 million US dollars, or about 7 billion rand, that the country is going to benefit on the HIV/AIDS program over the next 3 years. And the Global Fund has also made a commitment for the rollout of lenacapavir, which is a pre-exposure prophylaxis for HIV/AIDS prevention. With regards to the question raised by Honorable Siate on the issue of declared unspent fund or savings for the Department of Social Development, you raised the question whether is this due to exclusion of eligible beneficiaries? No. The savings of 1 billion rand under the Department of Social Development is mainly due to ongoing reforms to conduct bank verification checks on beneficiaries, and this has been part of the conditions of allocation to SASSA, and we are starting to see the fruits of those reforms to ensure that we deal with inclusion errors, not exclusion errors. So those who are eligible, they still receive their grants, but those who committed fraud and corruption, they are being weaned out of the system, and hence a decline in beneficiary numbers and savings. Thanks, Chair.
So I have a few questions. Perhaps maybe they're brief, so if you can respond, then we can deal with it directly. Honorable Gallagher Mazibuko, are you raising a point? I don't see your hand up.
Sorry, Chair, I don't know what happened with the hand. My hand is disabled. Chair, I don't want to disturb you when you have asked your questions. I also don't want to ask after you have asked. There's a question I have put on the chat, and I'm not sure if the team has seen that question on the allocation for the recent announcement by the President or declaration by the President.
Well, I thought, Honorable Gallagher Mazibuko, in the previous response by the previous speaker, that was speaking to specifically that question. At least that was my reading of it in response.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the response in that regard. Maybe DDG, can I get a quick? You've made in your slide presentations adjustments that were taken from transport for particularly to the presidency and to DIRCO on shortfalls on G20. How much is the G20 costing us?
Chair, I'm busy with drafting a letter for the minister's consideration on your letter around all of this. Thus far, we have spent for this financial year at the national level, we have spent 662 million rand on the G20. This was funded through allocations that were made in the adjustments budget last year, so that we've also made allocations in the main budget this year. And we also have proposed in this budget, in this appropriation bill, further allocations that would assist with the Leaders Summit. So we will only have a final number from a national expenditure point of view once all the targets or all the invoices have been settled in relation to what's just happened over the past weekend, and departments have some time to do all of that. We also have a further 336 million rand that has come through sponsorships. Some of that is in kind and some of that would be in cash. And those numbers would exclude what we would have from public entities, what was allocated and what has been spent by public entities and what have been spent by subnational governments, i.e., for example, what the Provincial Department of Community Safety for traffic officers have spent in Gauteng and the Joburg Metro Police, and any of the work associated with any upgrades that the city of Johannesburg has done. Thank you.
So if you would be able to, in your response, include those, because those would be helpful. Because my second question is, the adjustments that you are making are born out of the adjustment coming from transport. What was the money that has been taken away from the vote on transport been taken away from, given the fact that there was a massive pronouncement earlier on in the year regarding expenditure that's earmarked in that particular vote?
So as I explained, that 580 million rand forms part of the 4.4 billion rand that we have in declared unspent funds in the Department of Transport vote. This is as a result of a reduction that we have made on transport's transfer that they make to SANRAL, the National Roads Agency. And it's because the National Roads Agency was sitting on large cash balances of previous unspent funds that the department transferred. So in this way, we are saying to SANRAL, please spend the money you already have before further transfers are being made, and that is the money that we have reduced it by.
Okay. Now, I want to understand from your perspective, there's been this big discussion about rationalization of our foreign missions, etc. Where is that process gone? And I'll tell you why I juxtaposition the two issues. When we look at cost-cutting mechanisms that have been put forward by the minister, in essence, the key big interventions speak to double dipping on social grant recipients, etc., or double dipping on social grants in general. I would argue at least that's one way. I'm not trying to be political. The point is, someone who's defrauding the state, and I'm not suggesting fraud is a good idea, but someone who's double dipping on social grant is a totally different person relative to what we could use other saving mechanisms, not to ignore that. But I would argue there's all of these agencies that are coming on board. I don't see whether there's been enough intervention that deals with particularly people who sit on multiple boards, or the duplication of agency functions, or the cutting down of agencies. That is on one aspect. And then on foreign missions, we had made a pronouncement about rationalizations of foreign missions. Where is the update on that? Because it seems like the adjustments are being done on one end, but are not necessarily being done at the top end of the argument.
So, Chair, we have a whole range of recommendations that we have put to the Technical Committee on the Budget and to the Ministers' Committee on the Budget on areas of rationalization that forms part of the task process. The work around all of that continues. So with some of the things that we had mentioned, both in Chapter 4 and in the Minister of Finance's speech, are some of the big issues that we have highlighted, where we have a lot more progress and decisions on compared to those that we don't have decisions on. So we continue doing the work around all of that. We have made a recommendation around further rationalization around foreign missions in the same way that we have around the reorganization of government and some of the other suggestions that comes around finding efficiency gains in a complete kind of reorganization of some institutions too, what needs to be closed down and all of that, and the work around all of that continues. But as one of the things that I didn't say around the TARS that I should have maybe said in response to Honourable Wakeland's question is that this is a work in progress and will be entrenched within our budgeting process. So what we don't do now in this cycle, we will do in the next cycle. So, for example, some of the big data-driven approaches that we are taking, one of the things that we also summarize about how we are approaching all of this in Chapter 4 of the MTBPS is what we call using a program assessment matrix that helps us identify low priority programs, underperforming programs, and programs that are not fit for purpose. Or it also helps us identify some of the cross-cutting issues that may sit across departments and programs that helps us identify, look at duplication and some inefficiencies in relation to procurement. That work, whatever we don't capture in this round of the budget, we continue into the next round of the budget. We are talking to the presidency about how we take an Operation Vulindlela approach to all of this, so that we can create greater transparency on what it is that we're doing, with more regular reporting on where we are in the process in looking at these things. That helps us meet the general target around improving spending efficiencies in the system.
I'm going to request, DDG, that perhaps you, in due course, National Treasury come and brief the committee on TARS, because it's a fairly informed process and there seems to be a lot on it that you are hinging on, but there are some philosophical questions we might need to put forward. But I want to understand, my next question is, on the special appropriation, you've made allocations for the, I mean, the relative allocation is never commensurate to what PEPFAR does, right? And so is there thinking around the medium term how you compensate for it relative, and then I put the question relative to any additional, and this might be a question for the fiscal framework, which is not the function of this meeting, but to speak really to the question about if there are any additional taxes that are coming on board. I did raise yesterday, even with the FFC, and I raise it with you today, tagging of items on the budget as national health insurance is, according to the Minister of Health, incorrect. But in this regard, I want to understand this question of the compensation for PEPFAR, given that it's only a fraction of what it is. Some of the agencies, some of the NGOs, and as per the PBO's presentation, the deepening levels of poverty make this issue a more serious one. What is your thinking on the medium term, given that whatever, it's 700 million relative to 4 billion are different sums, and therefore, how do we compensate for it? And are you thinking of additional taxes going into next year?
Well, Chair, as you know, I can't answer any questions on additional taxes, but what I can do is explain to you in how we're thinking about how you fund new priorities. I mean, as we had explained in the budget guidelines and when we introduced the TARS, is that any new priorities will have to come out of existing baselines. So, or out of the existing budget. So from an expenditure point of view, what that expenditure ceiling is, I mean, using the task process would allow us to then identify very specific areas of rationalization that creates the fiscal space to fund new priorities as they emerge. If Cabinet makes the decision around what the thinking is around replacing the PEPFAR funding and to what extent we do all of that, it then comes out of what the pot of money that we use to identify for efficiencies, for program rationalizations, entity closures, and all of those things. Some of those things we can do immediately. Some of that would need policy changes, legislative changes. So, for example, around closing down public entities, that would need a repeal of legislation. So some of those things take a bit longer. But the idea and the fiscal approach to all of this is that we use the TARS to pay for those kinds of things to the extent that we are able to afford it.
Now, my last question speaks to really this. I mean, there's a lot of work that we define as social wage, and I don't deny the fact that National Treasury does a lot of work around dealing with the poor. And of course, when we met with Salga yesterday, maybe it's a side question, is that they're asking that if you remove the skills fund, how do you replace it given municipal capacity, et cetera, et cetera? They have a proposal about any alternative ways, but I want to speak to a different, when I spoke to the Statistician General, we look at obviously a quintile model of income distribution. And so when you look at your two middle quintiles, so citizens who are earning just over, some of them just below 100,000, in those categorization, many of them send their kids to quintile 4 or 5 schools. So effectively your fee-paying schools or your high fee-paying schools, it is my impression that you have cut funding towards those. And certainly there's a decline in subsidies per learners who are going through them. Now, if you put that in relation to the fact that this acts as especially in citizens who are your personal income taxpayers, not that the tax burden is not shared by all citizens, we all pay VAT, but these contribute through personal income tax. How is that verifiable, the cutting that you've done there? And fair enough, I can accept that you've done infrastructure built in provinces and flood relief. I get that in school infrastructure. I just want to understand the rationality behind cutting in quintile 4 and 5 schools and the reductions of teachers across the last. The response we got is that at least even now, over 30,000 teachers have left, are leaving the profession. Is that by design or default? And how do you intend compensating, particularly for that category of citizen and schooling, when those cuts have already taken place? Provinces are starting to raise the fact that they are losing more and more teachers.
So, Chair, there are two components of the Constitution around the division of revenue that I think are important. The first would be the vertical equity, and the other one would be the horizontal equity. And a lot of what you are raising, Chair, are policy decisions or policy choices that the Department of Basic Education has made around how they're thinking about what needs to happen with schools and how schools are funded. And as you know, funds follow function. So the functions associated with all of that. So, I'm reluctant to comment on or to give a view on, because that is what it will be, is to give a view on what is a policy choice that the Department of Basic Education has made on how they're thinking about school funding and how they're thinking about what needs to happen with teachers.
So what you are saying to me is that I'm crying at the wrong funeral. I should rather go speak to the Minister of Education. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
At least part of my qualification is understanding what is said in the subtleties, but it doesn't change the fact that there are some challenges in terms of, and I think this policy direction or directive that's been given will have other impact that I don't think we quite recognize. And certainly, I'm not one anti-Bella. I get that the ECD Center funding needs to go into place. But if you start to cut in quintile 4 and 5 schools, you are burdening the citizen who is in fact acts as at least 40% of your tax base. And so you are asking that citizen to shortchange in other areas. But that is a debate for another day. Let me thank National Treasury. If there are any additional questions that need to be put forward, I'm going to request that at least some supplementary information be brought through in writing. I also want to thank the PBO. I think the insights you've shared, certainly about, which is a deep passion of mine, that the deepening levels of poverty. I don't think South Africa is having a conversation about poverty necessarily. I think that we kind of have thought the solid response is welfare, and I'm not certain we've thought through other components of multidisciplinary or multi-dimensional poverty. And therefore, I do think the presentation that you've shared here today, and certainly from a budgeting point of view, is going to be important. I want to highlight the points that you've made about the BMA, which I think, as per the Money Bills and Related Matters Act, we've put the report together. And as a committee, I would ask that we now engage National Treasury formally to figure out how the additional allocations need to be done in the next financial year that is coming up in the tabling of the budget in February. So I want to thank the PBO for that work. It is precisely the job of Parliament and to figure out what the best adjustments need to look like going into next year's budget. So in the light of all of that, I want to thank both the PBO and the National Treasury, and then some of the information, and then also commit ourselves to saying in the next while we'll then take the actions that we need going forward. Thank you very much, honorable members. I don't believe there are any more additional questions or inputs that we can take. It is now 12:06, and I want to thank everybody for being here. We will then convene on Friday at the set time. I think it's 1 o'clock for the public hearings on both these respective bills, and then we'll then begin our work in being able to prepare the reports that need to be debated and considered by the full plenary when that takes place. So I will look forward to seeing members on Friday. Thank you very much, honorable members. Mashila, I don't think there are any additional announcements I need to make, are there?
No, there aren't, Chair. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you very much, honorable members. I wish you a very good day. Thank you. The meeting is thus adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Recording stopped.